What's it like to be the survivor of a disaster event? Since I live in Chile, I'm used to earthquakes. Perhaps in some countries, an earthquake of magnitude 6 on the Richter scale is something big, but here it's kind of normal. But the one I'll never forget is the 8.8 earthquake on the Richter scale that happened in Santiago of Chile. Let me explain a bit. I'm a native of the northern region of the country, where most of the earthquakes happen, so the constructions are especially resistant against earthquakes. Santiago is not like that, since they rarely get too much movement. Anyway, I was going to a concert there, and I was staying in a friend's apartment for the week I was there. It was the 27th of February 2010, 3:33 a.m. I was chilling with my friend and some of his pals when suddenly all of the lights went down. We thought that maybe the building got a malfunction. Then, looking through the large windows, we saw all of the city going completely dark. I don't know if you guys have been in an apartment building during a huge earthquake, but I'd describe it as being akin to being on top of a wet noodle that moves one side to another constantly. The first thing that got to my head is to stay away from the large windows and to get under the table. I happened to be in a very calm mindset in this situation, apparently. While my friend and his mates were screaming like hell, I tried to keep them calm by telling them the usual. Everything's going to be okay, earthquakes are usually short, so we just need to wait in safety. Holy crap, was I wrong. The earthquake, magnified by the swaying of the building, was 3 minutes long. The longest 3 frickin' minutes of my life. When it finished, I was relieved. I checked if everyone was okay, and they were, just scared as all heck. I told my friend Ben that we needed to get the hell out of there. Ben suggested that we pack a backpack with some supplies. When he was getting his backpack, his friends just ran out of the place to their families. He told them to stop, that we needed to stay cool and together, but their need to see their families was greater, and I do kind of understand that. Ben finished packing and we started running to the emergency stairs. We were making our way out using cell phones to illuminate the hallway, when suddenly Ben stops me from nowhere. I ask him what's wrong and he just replies, "Look," and points the flash of the phone to the floor. It was just like the movies. The building was split in half. I swore loudly and then he fell to his knees while looking at the bottom of the building. His friends, in the rush to see their families, didn't see that the building was split and fell down the crack. We expected the worst. Ben started crying and I was in shock. Just 30 minutes ago we had been hanging out with them, laughing, and now we can just see their bodies down there. An infinity of screams and cries created the atmosphere of our night. We made our way down through the holes in the building. While doing so, we tried to help as many people as we could, some trapped by giant pieces of concrete and some just dead. I saw so many images that will haunt me forever. We got to the place where Ben's friends fell, and thanks to I don't know who, they were still alive, with many broken bones, but alive. We took them one by one to the road and waited for help from the police, military, medics or fire people. I can't believe we all made it. I watched and experienced 2 sides of people that day, the ones that try everything to help others in any way possible, and on the other side the ones that take advantage of the situation, just to steal stuff from destroyed homes. So that's my story. It's actually way longer, but I didn't want to make it tedious to read. Thanks for reading my story. My god, that was far more horrifying than I was expecting, even with the topic of this particular video. I can't imagine just realizing that you were on the edge of a chasm. The implication that your tall building is split completely in half would honestly paralyze me. When I was 9, we were traveling from our cabin back to town with an open boat. This was right before Easter, about a 45-minute trip. The seas were rough and the boat had a built-in flaw that caused it to break into 2 pieces due to the pounding of the waves. I sat face towards the back, so I didn't see it break at first, just suddenly had water up to my waist. When I turned around, the nose was floating a couple of meters away from the boat. My mum's husband at the time just said, "Jump," and so we did, into the black 2-degree water of the North Sea, as far away from the boat as possible. This was by far the scariest moment. Her husband managed to launch 2 emergency rockets before the boat vanished below him. He was a very poor swimmer, and even though we tried to hold on to him, he got away from us due to the large waves constantly covering us. After that, it was about 10 minutes of trying to swim to shore, which was about 400 meters away, before realizing we were never going to make it. After that, we basically dodged waves and made bad taste jokes. We saw people on the shore, cars stopped on the highway. The last thing I remember before blacking out is a boat approaching. Then I woke up in the hospital, basically thrashing around from the cramps of my body trying to warm up. Apparently, I had a temperature of 27 degrees when they brought me in. My mum was awake the whole time. She lost control of her limbs right after I blacked out and gripped a rope from my life vest in her teeth so I wouldn't float away. Even though this was a scary story, there were some awesome elements to it. An old fisherman in the house by the shore saw the whole thing. He was desperately trying to get a hold of rescue services, but no one was where they were supposed to be. His wife, having lost both her previous husbands and also a son at sea, had some kind of health issue while watching us swim around. So he had to take care of her while trying to get us help. The most awesome part of the story is how we got rescued. One of my mum's husband's friends got a call about what was happening. He got in a boat with his 8-month pregnant wife and went full speed to our location. The boat he had was not designed for high seas. It was a summer kind of cabin cruiser, so he had to steer it towards the waves at all times. His wife then proceeded to pull 3 fully clothed people up to safety, including an unconscious me. If anyone has ever tried to pull someone out of the water, you know how difficult it is. We all survived. I was totally fine, aside from my family jewels swelling up to 3 times the normal size for a couple of days. My mum tore a bunch of stuff in her back, and the husband swallowed about 4 liters of salt water and was sick for a week. In short, boat broke in 2, cold water, amazing rescue. My husband's parents lived on a boat off the coast of Asia for a while about 20-something years ago. Well, when my mother-in-law was about 8 months pregnant with my brother-in-law, the boat sank in the middle of the ocean. It happened slowly over the course of a day or so the couple sent out a bunch of distress calls, packed the important things, and camped out in the lifeboat while the ship sank. They saved a few nice things for their eventual rescuers, a nice canned ham and a good bottle of wine. Well, they were eventually picked up by the Exxon Valdez, which was fortunate. Unfortunately, at the time, the crew was entirely Muslim, and as such, the canned ham and nice wine weren't ideal gifts. I was pilot in command of a small Cessna, taking my dad out for his first sightseeing ride on an October evening. He'd taken the back seat in one of my training sessions before, but this time was the first time the 2 of us were alone together and at liberty to go as we pleased. After a while, I noticed that the engine had lost 300 RPM. I pushed the throttle to max and no change. Turned on the carb heat, if I remember correctly, and nope, still nothing. I began heading back to the airport. But as the power slowly diminished, I knew we wouldn't make it back by a long shot. Conclusion, I had to get that bird down somewhere. It was at nighttime. Beneath me were patches of fields or forest, and I couldn't tell which was which in the evening darkness. I opted for the only well-lit place in the circumstances, the freeway. I made my emergency call, got a response, told my dad what I was about to do, and proceeded to fly the airplane. By the time I was on my so-called final approach, the engine was puttering along at a measly 1000 RPM despite a full open throttle. All I had to do was follow a slight bend in the freeway to the left, just past a viaduct, and I'd have 3 open lanes of road on which to land, and probably surprise a few drivers along the way. Huge black bars suddenly showed up in my field of vision, followed by bright white flashes of light. The aircraft had just struck high-voltage power lines. By the time I was done screaming, the aircraft had rolled down in a side ditch and slammed itself against a fence. Ambulances arrived within a minute, pulled my dad and I out, and raced us to the hospital. I awoke in a dimly lit hospital room. Dimly lit because of the citywide power failure that I'd just caused, which I realized once all the other lights turned on late at night and the nurses cheered at getting power back. Somehow, I didn't break anything, although I had a sore and stiff body for a few weeks, and my back became prone to locking for the next several years. My father had a few broken bones but was judged stable and set to recover. However, he suddenly and unexpectedly succumbed to his wounds a week later. I haven't piloted an aircraft since, and I have no desire to. I can be a passenger in an airliner or commercial small aircraft without a problem, but my days of flying pilot are over. Well, can't blame you for that one. My condolences. But color me surprised that both of you even survived the initial impact, let alone one of you carrying on more or less unscathed for the rest of their life. I kind of assumed that hitting those things at plane speed would be an instant end to things. Woof. I was stuck in a bushfire here in Australia. My significant other, myself, and our infant son were in the car evacuating on the only road out of our small town. We'd got very little warning as the fire moved so quickly. Fire was coming on the right side of the road, there was smoke everywhere, we could hardly see. My significant other was driving and luckily saw the truck in front of us and stopped just in time before hitting it. A semi-trailer truck, an 18-wheeler, had jackknifed in the road and was just blocking the way. We couldn't see if anyone was in the truck, and I was going to get out and check, but the fire was now at the roadside on our right, and years of fire safety education had taught me you stay in the car. We had a UHF radio in the car, so I tried to contact the truck on that with no response. The fire started to blow across the road and ignite the bush to our left. There were embers raining down on the car, we just stared at them bouncing off the bonnet. I saw a flashing red glow in the smoke beyond the truck, and it took a minute or so to work out what I was seeing. It was a fire service truck. I had to fight every bit of instinct I had in me, which was screaming to go grab my baby, hide him inside my clothes, and run towards the red lights. I doubt I'd have made it. Fire was literally blowing around in front of us, but damn if that wasn't the strongest instinct I've ever felt. I just sat there in the car, repeating over and over to myself, Stay in the car, stay in the car. My partner managed to contact the fireys on the UHF to alert them to our presence. They sprayed water over us while a secondary truck drove through the burning scrub around the big truck to reach us, and then the rest was all a blur, being transferred to their truck and driving out there, watching the bushfire raging behind us. I saw the news in the hospital where they reported 2 deceased people found in that same semi-truck. Volunteer firefighters saved our lives. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was in a plane crash in 2013. 3 friends and I had taken a Cessna to interior BC for the long weekend. One of those friends had their private pilot's license. The day we were heading home, it was quite hot, and the plane was, according to investigators, overloaded and overfueled for the heat and altitude. Once we reached 2,000 feet above takeoff, we began losing airspeed. The pilot panicked and did some steep turns in an attempt to gain some speed, but it nearly scrubbed all of our altitude pretty much instantly. Now at a few hundred feet and descending rapidly, the pilot took aim at a farmer's field. They managed to level us out at around tree height, but we were quickly running out of field. Maybe 100 or so meters before the end of the field, they dropped the plane to the ground, the nose dug in, and we flipped end for end. I ended up walking away essentially unscathed, minor bruising from the seatbelt and some small scratches. The pilot had a pretty good cut and bashed their knee up against the dashboard. The front passenger, my girlfriend, took pretty much the brunt of it all. Her seat ripped off the floor, smashing her against the roof. It shredded the ligaments on the side of her neck, compressed her spine, and concussed her badly. The ligaments were bad and are still causing issues now, 5 years later. But the post-concussion issues were far worse. Watching someone you love lose the ability to read, remember what they had for breakfast, or whether or not they had breakfast, or maintain any semblance of emotional stability, or even do something like play a board game to pass the time, because learning and remembering the rules was too stressful, it was the worst thing I've ever experienced. It took a solid 2 years before things started returning to what I could call normal. So when I was a very young child, I lived in Southeast Asia. One day, early in the morning, I was just playing. My parents must have been doing their normal morning prayers, and the next thing I knew, the entirety of the ocean was just spilling over itself. We lived on the coast at the time, and it was like the whole ocean had just lifted out. My dad grabbed me and ran towards a block of apartments at the end of the street. I don't know what happened to my mum, but she must have been unable to run fast enough, because I'm pretty sure she got overwhelmed by the tide and survived by holding onto a tree. I'm not entirely sure how she survived, actually, because looking back at the extent of the 2004 tsunami, she should have been swept away completely by the force of the water. So now I'm on the top of this roof and my dad goes back in, swimming to our house to retrieve our passports and documents, while the water keeps creeping up. I think it was a 4 or 5 story building and the water must have reached the 2nd or 3rd floor. He must have been a really strong swimmer because he got pretty much all of the documents in between waves and probably saved my mum as well. So after this we were able to stay with friends some distance away, but everything in the town got destroyed. I realized the reason my parents don't bring up my childhood friends or try to keep in contact with their families is because they're dead. This is pretty much the only really vivid memory I have from that age, and my parents still kind of had a fear of the sea for a long time after that. They still can't handle videos of flooding. I survived an airplane crash. The story was my mother owned a few aircraft and a hangar at our small town's airport. I spent a lot of time at the airport as I was growing up, spending summer washing airplanes, sweeping out hangars and stuff. One warm summer afternoon in the mid-1980s, we planned to take a short flight in her Piper J3 Cub. This plane was built in the mid-1940s and had an aluminium skeleton covered in fabric and tandem seats, one in front, one in back. I sat in front due to the better view, and my mum, the pilot, sat in the back. I remember the pre-flight and some taxiing to the runway, but nothing else. Now the rest of the story I received secondhand. Neither my mum or I remember anything from the actual accident due to the massive head trauma we both received. But what I've heard from family and ambulance drivers who arrived at the scene is that on takeoff, the most dangerous part of any flight in my humble opinion, we lost power. Engine cut out and I'm not really sure why. So with relatively slow airspeed and no thrust from the engine, we changed from being a beautiful flying machine to a brick, rather quickly. Well, we dropped like a brick and proceeded to hit the ground in a rather brick-like manner. The ambulance driver who arrived at the scene thought we were done for. Things didn't look good for us. But after a helicopter ride to the nearest trauma center 100 miles away, we were still alive and breathing, and still are today. I spent about 5 weeks in the hospital, but only remember the last 2. To remember what happened, I have nasty scars on my lower lip and chin, and a dent on the side of my head. One thing I find myself wondering is, if I had the chance to relive the whole thing over, would I want to remember? At this point in my life, I can say I would not. Such things aren't worth remembering. And for those wondering if we ever flew again, you bet. As soon as my mum was able to pass a flight physical, we were both up in the air again. Yeah, I can see your mentality being okay here because there aren't as many traumatizing factors. You both seemed to live and breathe airplanes, and neither of you lost a loved one, just some memories. I imagine a lot of people as into planes as you both seem to be would be straight back in there as well. I was on a boat that sank on the Mekong River in Southeast Asia. It was a 2-day trip with an overnight stop, as it was too dangerous to be on the river after dark. We stayed in a bar and got extremely drunk as there was a serious tropical storm that had knocked the power out in this tiny village on the banks of the river. The following morning, we set off on the final leg of the journey really early the next day. Everyone was feeling pretty terrible after drinking way too much, so we were trying to get a few hours nap on the boat. Around an hour or two into the boat journey, the boat rolled quite heavily to one side and some cups and glasses slid off the tables and fell onto the floor, startling most of us awake. We picked it all up off the floor and went back to sleep. I'm not sure how much later, but the same thing happened again, but even more violently. The boat rolled so heavily I slid from one side to the other and smashed into a table on the now lower side of the boat. At this point, I'm noticing that water is starting to come over the side and was getting deeper. Everyone was looking around at each other, looking pretty terrified, not knowing what to do. The water level was now probably waist-height. I told my girlfriend to get out of the boat and swim for the banks of the river. I had to help her climb out of the side of the boat and onto the roof, as the lower side was pretty much now fully submerged. At this point, I realized I was now stuck between the table I'd smashed into and a bench that had fallen on top of my leg, with the water now getting towards shoulder height and the boat sinking pretty rapidly. I took a final breath and went down with the boat. It's hard to say how long, but it probably sank at around a minute. 2 if you were being generous. Luckily, as the boat fully sank, the benches and tables started to float and move away from each other, and I got free without too much trouble. I opened my eyes and all I could see was brown, dirty water with some sunlight in the distance. I swam towards it, being careful not to knock my head on anything and to knock myself out, trying to swim horizontally until I was sure I was clear from the boat before I could try for the surface. I managed to pop up not too far away from the riverbank. I looked around and saw a few of the other passengers being swirled around in the rough current, trying to grab anything that was floating to save themselves, calling out for help. I'm a pretty terrible swimmer, so I realized trying to help anyone would probably just end in them dragging me down with them, so I struggled and eventually made it to the bank. I made it, but I didn't have the energy to pull myself out of the water. I half got onto some rocks and waited to catch my breath. Some other passengers that made it out of the water ran over to tell me my girlfriend was safe further downstream. The guy driving the boat had jumped in and pulled her out because she was struggling. This boat was being run by a young family that lived on board, as is customary in large parts of Southeast Asia. It's considered rude to wear your shoes inside someone's house, and as a consequence, we'd all removed our shoes when boarding the boat. We were now trying to traverse the rocky banks of the river with no shoes, trying to find other passengers. The captain of the boat was at this stage screaming at the river, not knowing if his wife and 2 kids had made it off the boat before it sank. We came across them later on. His wife had somehow managed to make it with her baby slung over her back and her young son in tow. After a while, we'd managed to flag down another passing boat. Initially, they didn't stop, but I think they must have started to see random bits of floating debris from the boat and realized what had happened and come back for us. Further down the river, we found more passengers that had been rescued by some local fishermen. We tried to account for everyone and quickly worked out that everyone was present apart from one girl. No one had seen her during the final scramble to get off the boat. We boarded the boat that we had managed to flag down and left for the nearest large town, where we'd be able to get in contact with our country's embassies. There was 0 phone signal around here, and all of our phones were either in the river or completely soaked. The nearest embassies we tried to call were over 6 hours away. The local fishermen promised us that they'd search for the missing passenger. Having made it to the next town after a pretty frickin' long day by this point, we were greeted by the local police, who were in plain clothes, as it was Songkran and everyone was celebrating by having a huge 3-day water fight. They took some details and told us to come to the station in a few days. We ended up having to sit around for days sorting out loads of stuff as our passengers were lost and all the local places that could do anything were closed. Once we got enough documents to allow us to move on and fly to the capital, we had to go to our consulate to sort out new travel documents and assist in the matter about the missing passenger with her friends that had made it off the boat. She was from the same country as us. After a few days, the consulate informed us a body had been found and, unfortunately, it was the missing passenger, which was a pretty devastating experience to take along with the additional stress everyone was currently going through. I feel like I'm rambling on now, but after a few weeks we luckily managed to get new passports without flying home, which we were informed is the standard procedure for my country's passport office. Going home to get a full passport wasn't really an option as we were about 5 weeks into a 7-month trip. It was a pretty fun 6 months after that, although we did end up in some pretty dangerous situations. We were also on 2 buses that crashed, and a friend of mine that came and met us for a month was involved in a pretty nasty motorbike accident. Apologies for the poor comprehension, I've never taken time to write this experience down before, and I'm not the best writer as it is. In short, got on a boat, it sank, it wasn't too much fun. What happens when retail workers finally snap? 2 women came into the store screaming at each other. As I was coming out from the back, I gather from the yelling that one had nearly hit the other's car. Nearly, but no actual incident had occurred. It was a busy Saturday, people were starting to stare, I was trying to gather my wits, thinking how best to handle it, when my manager came flying in from nowhere. She just yells, "Either come in here and shop like people or go outside with the rest of the animals." One left and one stayed. A bunch of my co-workers quit. I worked at McDonald's in 1997 and we had Beanie Babies as Happy Meal toys at one point. It was insane. They literally had to buy a security cage to keep the toys locked down in the back. They were delivered with a security escort. People were ordering 100 Happy Meals with no food because we couldn't sell the toys by themselves. One day I heard a commotion up front and found my high school counselor reaching across the counter, grabbing one of the owners by the shirt because we were out of the pink flamingo. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. She had to be dragged out. It's scary how easy it can be to work people up into a frenzy. Worked at Radio Shack for 6 months while in college. Pretty much had at least one terrible experience per shift. The one that stands out the most was a guy who wanted us to honor the warranty on his iPhone cable. The thing was a mutilated mess. It had clearly stopped working and he had tried to fix it himself by cutting the cable apart and attempting to solder 2 wire pieces together. We calmly explained that we couldn't process a claim for an item that was willfully destroyed, and he started screaming in our faces about how Radio Shack is a scam, and "I'm going to sue all of you." Then he tries to whip my co-worker, a 5-foot-tall, non-threatening woman, with his broken cable. She managed to turn her head and catch the wire with her hand before it caught her in the face. Myself and another employee chased him out of the store and called the police, but nothing came of it. Radio Shack shoppers really were the worst. Oh, my friend, I feel like by the end of this video we'll have plenty of other strong contenders for that title. I know full well from working with the Am I the Jerk channel just how often Karens are prepared to fly into physical assault mode when their retail workers inconvenience them with the truth. So I think this wire whipper is just the gentle tip of the iceberg. I worked at a ski resort when I was younger, fitting boots and sizing skis, among other things, in a ski rental shop. My first year, I worked at basically the Walmart of rentals, the cheapest option and the biggest store. So the week of Christmas, there were lines out the door every single day. I remember seeing my 2-week paycheck after the first 2 weeks around Christmas, and I'd worked 119 hours. It was absolute insanity. For another reference, the closest town had a permanent residency of less than 10,000 people. But during Christmas, it jumped up to 70,000 people trying to enjoy their vacation in the same spot. So one of these days, it was business as usual, a quarter-mile line out the door, non-stop craziness. I was at the bench closest to the door helping a lady when this kid walks up to my bench. I asked if I could help him and he said he had a reserved rental online and just wanted to pick it up. I said our store name and then said, "If that's where you reserved, you'll need to get back in the line and we'll help you as soon as we can." This 13-year-old kid said, "This is frickin' bullcrap," in front of the customer I was helping. I told him that quite literally every piece of equipment in our store was reserved, every single person in front of you has a reservation as well, and we have to help everyone. He started insulting me personally, saying I was a stupid witch and that he was going to report us to anyone he could because we weren't letting him skip hundreds of people doing the exact same thing he was doing. I think what made him really angry is that I'm a 6'3" woman and big. He was maybe 5 foot and something like 120 pounds, so when he called me a stupid B-word, it wasn't witch by the way, I literally laughed in his face. I was at no point threatened by this child, and at first it was funny. This lady left, I was ignore-laughing this kid and asking for the next person who was patiently waiting in line, and he starts yelling every cuss word in the book at me because I'm not helping him. Up until this point, my manager had been a complete jerk and I was not a fan of him. But he had had enough of the Christmas rush as well, and it was the perfect person to let off some steam on. I went and got my manager and told him this kid was personally attacking me and yelling cuss words in front of customers. So he walks up to the kid saying, "I'm sorry for the confusion, what's your name so I can take a look at your reservation?" And the kid lights up, thinking he finally beat the system and he'll get what he wants because he threw a public tantrum in front of everyone. My manager went and found his reservation. It was digital, but I'm pretty sure he printed it off for added dramatic effect. Came back and says, "Found it," and proceeds to rip it in half in front of the kid's face. "Don't ever treat someone that's trying to help you like that again. You're never allowed in our store again. And with every other store in town also being completely 100% booked on equipment, good luck skiing this weekend." I still didn't like the guy, but I respected him 1 point more for the rest of the season for standing up for me. I worked in a T-Mobile store. A lady came in screaming about how she bought a phone the previous day but didn't buy insurance and then dropped it in a pool immediately. She was demanding I give her a new phone for free, but she wasn't even our customer. She was a Verizon customer. She screamed at me for about 10 minutes demanding I call our manager. She then started yelling at other customers about how awful we were. We called the cops. This tale takes place roughly 22 years ago at a community college bookstore. As with any college bookstore, the start of the semesters were incredibly busy. In order to help ease the insanity in our little place, we set up a table outside the front door for doing returns. And that's where I was stationed for the day. People got in line, they got to me, I processed the paperwork for their return and sent them inside to the cashiers. This is an important point. I had no cash, no ability to process cards, just me, a table, a stack of paper, and some pens. That's it. Well, a middle-aged lady gets to me. She's obviously not lacking for funds. Her son has dropped all of his classes and she's just returning his books. Okay, cool. I do all the paperwork, hand her back the document, and direct her inside. And she goes ballistic that she has to wait in line again. I mean, starting nuclear wars ballistic. The customers in line behind her actually went to my manager to file formal statements about her behavior. Not my behavior, hers. Because they knew. I took a break and shook it off. Everyone has bad days, and I know that I have the customer's statements to back me up. A few days pass and the manager gets a call. It's the president of the college. With a complaint. The woman called the president of the college to complain about me personally. So my manager and I head off to a meeting with the president and the woman. We walked in calm and polite. The woman instantly begins her tirade, still screaming and cursing. My manager pulls out the statements and without a word hands them to the president. The president calmly reads them. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember watching the woman turn more and more red. I do remember the word entitled used a bunch of times. And I do remember him saying, "Don't waste my time ever again," before he showed her the door. I had a customer who used a racial slur to describe one of my employees for no other reason beyond the fact that he saw them and was offended that one of them was doing their job by doing the oil change that he came to us to do. I told him to apologize to my employee or we'll push his car right out of the bay without oil. He refused, so we did just that. Told him he's more than welcome to buy his own oil and finish his oil change himself, and that he'll be charged double for all services here on out if he comes into my store. I had no problem telling this racist idiot to go screw himself. When I worked in the tool department at Sears, a guy wanted to get a replacement on his tape measure. I couldn't replace it because it was the tape that was messed up due to the guy mistreating it, and not caring because in his mind, Sears will replace it for free. The guy threatened to go out to his truck and get his shotty, come back in and shoot you, points at me, you, points at my manager who's taken over already, and you, points at my coworker who's standing nearby. I gave him the, "Why haven't you done it yet?" look, and he left. I worked at Sears. I was ready to die. Say what you will about all the crappy jobs I had as a student, none of them jaded me enough to the point where I could stare down a potential attacker and dare him to end my misery. Also, leaping to that threat over what, a $5, $10 tool? Wild. I worked at a pawn shop for a couple of years. We had a customer pawn a chainsaw which turned up stolen and was confiscated by police, which causes the store to lose money and police to be aware that he's a known thief. He came back something close to 3 months later to pawn something else. I didn't recognize him right away. I asked him if he'd pawned anything before, and he said yes. So I asked his last name and entered it into our computer, which promptly said, stolen. My first thought was, really? You came back here? I gave my boss, it's literally a 2-person store, a not very frequently used signal to discreetly call the police. Meanwhile, I started acting like I was working on his loan and stalled a bit. Just a couple of minutes later, a few police cars pulled up and the officers quietly walked in and he immediately gave up. I didn't really have to say anything to him. The handcuffs spoke for themselves. When the old guy I was serving kept looking at my chest and making creepy facial expressions, I asked him if he wanted a drink or if he was just going to keep staring. He excitedly put his hands out and went, "Oh, I can do more than stare," and tried to walk behind the bar. I told him to get the F out, to which he seemed very shocked and outraged, so I just started to loudly shout back to him, "Sir, please do not try to grope my chest. You need to leave." Over and over again until the rest of the bar was staring and he was panickedly whispering for me to please be quiet, so the wife I didn't know he came with wouldn't hear him. Can only imagine the argument that unfolded while she was dragging him out. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was 18 and worked at a local grocery store in the produce department. Beyond regular duties, we made fruit trays on weekends. Nothing fancy, just a variety of cut-up fruit in large red bowls. A guy came in after 10 p.m., we closed at 11, and asked for a tray with specific fruits. I tell him we unfortunately don't make custom trays, and then the 16-year-old guy who was also on shift with me overheard and told him it was slower tonight so he can do it for him. He says, "Okay, good." No gratefulness displayed at all. This coworker of mine is legit always extra kind to customers, and it's actually quite admirable. 20 minutes later, my coworker comes out of the back and presents it to this customer. He immediately starts screaming at him about how bad it looks. He yells things like, "That looks like absolute crap! Frick, are you an idiot?" And I run over to see what the problem is. The fruit tray looks absolutely standard, but this guy isn't having it. He smashes it on the ground and keeps screaming about how we are, quote, retarded, and that we've wasted his time. I snap and tell him to get the F out. He postures up. Keep in mind this is a guy in his 40s ready to fight some teenagers over a fruit tray. Numerous other employees run over and yell at him to get out. He says, "I'll be back for all of you retards," and runs towards and out of the sliding doors. All of this was on camera, luckily, so management calls the cops regarding his actions and that last threat. They end up arresting him later on because apparently he also had some warrants. I hope the fruit was worth it, idiot. Working as assistant general manager at a fast casual restaurant, and some 40-something woman starts going off on my cashier. I round the corner from the desk to see her dump soup all over our front-end cooler and knock a bunch of stuff onto the ground. I tell my cook to call 911 and say there's a woman causing a disturbance and breaking stuff. The address is next to the phone. I walk up and stand behind the counter and put on my happiest manager face, so overly happy that it drove the woman even more into a fit. So, raging cyclone-mad Karen starts knocking crap off the counters, throws 2 IBC root beers on the ground, and starts yelling at another guest who tried to come over and defuse the situation. I hold out for another few minutes before 2 cops run in. She's been screaming for a refund for 10 minutes at this point and breaking stuff. The cops walk in, I point at her and say, "Get her the F out of my restaurant," and she's arrested. Apparently her soup was too hot. Thanks for the frickin' headache, Karen. I comped 7 meals of other guests and had to work a double because my cashier was in a state and had to deal with the cops. Frick food service. I'm so glad that I'm out. Guy seated in the freezer of Trader Joe's, pants down, staring at a fresh turd he'd just laid in the middle of the aisle. It couldn't have been more obvious that the guy was trying to return stolen merchandise. He lost the receipt, didn't know when it was purchased, paid with cash so he couldn't just easily look up the transaction on a credit card. He said he'd call his friend to ask if they knew when it was purchased, and then he took out his iPhone without pressing a button and started to talk on it. I was like, I can clearly see the home screen with no call happening. When he got off the phone, I got a little bold and in my best retail manager voice said something to the effect of, "Oh, that's cool. Is that a new update where you can talk to someone without actually calling them?" And he left after that. Well, pretty slick line. It's always the stupidest people who seem to think that all other people are dumber than them, isn't it? There must be an expression for that way of thinking. It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, but the thing you think you're good at is life. Oh, my best story comes from my manager, on my behalf. I'd recently had a very bad experience in my first paid job and quit because I felt so insecure about my appearance and ability to work in a typical work environment. I have achondroplastic dwarfism, making me 4 feet tall and disproportionate. So instead, I was volunteering in a small-town charity shop to gain some confidence again. My manager knew all about this, and I was in the back room when this guy comes in and rings the bell. I walk in and he just stares at me, laughs, and says, "Is this Santa's workshop?" And I just stand there. My manager, who's at the till, says coldly, "Excuse me?" And the guy looks taken aback. "Sorry, I didn't expect to see someone like that here." They both look at me and I just awkwardly said something like, "Well, I am," and shrugged. And it would have been fine until he said, "So, do you make the toys?" My manager walked out from behind the counter, pointed out the door and said flatly, "Do not disrespect my staff. Get out." The guy started apologizing. "Out!" He still seemed to find the situation hilarious and left. Man, I miss that manager. She was the best. Thank you, Bianca. I used to work the reception desk at a tattoo shop. I had many get the frick out moments, but the one that stands out was a guy coming in with his girlfriend to get his name tattooed on her. She looked terrified, wouldn't make eye contact with me, didn't talk directly to me, and barely spoke. The whole conversation was the guy giving me her license and saying, she wants my name tattooed on her. I took way more info from both of them than I needed and tried to get the woman to come out back alone so I could talk to her, but the boyfriend wouldn't have it. I eventually went back and got the shop manager, a big dude, and told him what was up. I came back to the counter and lied, saying we didn't have walk-ins that day, and the guy got angry. Started yelling, shop manager came out and physically removed them from the shop. I called the cops and provided all the info I had. Was basically told they couldn't do anything unless it was self-reported. I still think about that woman all the time. I work at a Dutch 24/7 gas station. This German kid, between 20 to 25 years old, came into the shop drunk while driving, looked for beer, which we're not allowed to sell, and then got angry because he thought I'd hidden them from him. He wanted to start a fight and wanted to drive off in his car. That was impossible since I locked the door and alerted the cops. He lost his driver's license and got a huge fine which he had to pay instantly. What a jerk. The one that jumps out to me was when a customer was trying to return a wall mount that was 6 months out of policy. He was being snide and just laying into the customer service rep saying things like, "I know you can do this, I return crap out of policy all the time," or, "Well, if you weren't so stupid, it would be done by now." He ended up making her start to cry when he said, "Jesus Christ, are you retarded?" Well, she worked with special needs kids as a volunteer and this pushed her over the edge. I walked over to him and told her to go into the back and asked him why he thinks it's okay to talk like that. I'm guessing since I'm a male and a manager, he decided to be respectful. I was angry beyond belief at how he had made her cry though, so I cut off his explanation and told him to get out. He said, "Now hold on, let's all calm down," and I grabbed my radio piece and told security to go ahead and get the police on the way down there for someone trespassing. He left so fast at that comment that he forgot his wall mount. Jerk. This was over the phone. The customer was unhappy with their purchase, so I sent another one out to them in case it was defective. He called me later that week saying the new one had the same problem and he'd get violent if it wasn't solved. He was in his 80s, but I said, "You know what, we'll come pick it up and you can buy from somewhere else." It wasn't worth the hassle for a tiny commission. I used to work for Quick Lube in Alaska for a boss named John who was a decent manager and enjoyed handling customers. He was professional and kind and knowledgeable, but loved to tell a couple of stories of customers he'd told off. The coldest move was a customer who was berating him. The customer reached out and stuffed a business card into John's shirt pocket, demanding to see the boss right now. John said he took the card back out, shoved it in that guy's pocket and said, "The buck stops here, get the frick out of my shop." I've carried that as a reminder that professionals take crap as part of their job, but nobody should take too much. A guy I knew who worked at Dunkin' Donuts would use the line, "My manager says I only get to tell one customer to F off a year and I'm not going to waste that on you." Not quite the right type of answer, but relevant. I mean, this suggests that this guy actually had a really low tolerance for customer bullcrap since he had this zinger ready to go, and he's almost certainly still getting in trouble for it if the customer wants to report things, but I can't blame him. I worked at a barbecue restaurant for my first job. We had a takeout area where the customers can watch you cut the meat and pack the side dishes. The girl at the register rang up a quart of potato salad when the customer asked for a pasta salad, so I packed potato salad. When the customer received his order, he looked through it and flipped out when he saw potato salad and started screaming at me. Go figure. Unbeknownst to all of us, the owner of the store heard the commotion and was on the other side of the swing door behind me which had a small window. The angry customer decided to throw a quart of potato salad at me, which I ducked to avoid. It splattered against the window on the swing door as the owner was looking out of it. The owner burst through the door. He's 6'4" and very built, grabbed this scrawny guy by his shirt collar, and that guy straight up had fear in his eyes. My boss literally threw him out the door, went back to the register to ask the girl what his total was, grabbed the cash, and tossed it out the door at the angry customer as he was collecting himself off the ground. It was an awesome scene. In short, my former boss threw a customer out the door after the customer threw potato salad at me. I was a supervisor in a store where people could trade in goods for other secondhand stuff. One guy stands out, and I had a lot of imbeciles to deal with over my 7 years there. This guy had previously bought a phone from us and came back demanding we give him his money back or a new phone as the one we sold him had a crack in it. As it's secondhand, we might have missed the hairline crack during our testing. I thought, no biggie, so we swapped it. Thought that was the end of that. About a month later, he's the first customer of the day and he's cussing us out because his phone isn't working. He has a warranty, so we take the phone, open the casing, and what do we see? The phone is water damaged. 100% not how he would have sold it, since that's the first thing checked during a test. We tell him his warranty is void. Him and his wife freak out and start shouting, saying they'll stay here all day and tell others not to shop with us. I'm like, you're wasting your time, at least I'm paid to be here. Obviously, they don't like that, but he also slips up by saying, if I'd known it was water damaged, don't you think I would have pulled the sticker off so you guys wouldn't notice? The guy straight up confirms he's a fraud, keeps demanding his money back. At this point, I call center security and tell them what's up. They come in and say he has to leave. He says it's a public place. I decide to chime in and state it's private property, he's banned, and he can get the frick out. The guy won't leave when security demand it, so they get on the radio to the cops as the guy is now technically trespassing. His dumb harpy of a wife screeches at him, and they both hightail it out. All before I'd had my morning tea. What contenders have you seen for the world's stupidest criminal? My old roommate's a cop. He came home to tell me an ATM was robbed after hours for $15,240. The next day, the man who robbed the ATM deposited $15,240 into his personal account at the bank he robbed the night prior. I'll believe it, people are stupid as hell. There was this kid at my university the first year I was there. He ended up stealing a few books from the bookstore, so about $800 worth of stuff. Later the same day, he tried to sell them back to the bookstore that he stole them from. Yeah, it didn't end too well for him either. My mum's cousin was a bank robber. The time he got caught, he went into a bank, scoped the place out, left to go back to his bike. This motherfricker robbed banks on a frickin' bicycle, put the mask on, robbed the bank. The police see the tape, see that the bank robber was wearing the exact same clothes as the guy who left less than a minute before, and that was that. My ex stole a car and went to pick up his friend at the police station in said stolen vehicle. He parked right in front of a cop. The cop ran the plates and escorted him into the building. The next day, he was on the news as the most stupid criminal in town. A lot of people are asking me why I dated him. Well, he never told me that, to be fair. One day, I decided to Google his name and I found the article. Learn from me, ladies and gentlemen. Google your partner's names. You never know what they're hiding. And yes, best thing I did was break up with him. Mistakes were made. Every day I see a big black SUV with sheriff written on the side parked in the driveway across the street. I don't know if the guy is the sheriff or works for them, but one night I woke up to a dozen sirens outside. Turns out some idiot tried breaking into Sheriff Dude's house while he was home and his vehicle was right frickin' there. I knew a guy who got busted selling Mary J. He went to his hearing at the court and went through the metal detector with an Altoid tin full of E in his pocket. It set off the detector, sheriff's deputies searched him, found the pills, and arrested him on the spot. Look, criminals, I don't really want to tell you how to do your job, but it feels like this was such a no-brainer. If you really need to have your special treats the second you finish your trial, surely you can just leave it in your glove box. Were you planning on popping that in front of judge, lawyers, and bailiffs? A professor I had was a retired police detective. He told us about an armed robbery at a dry cleaner's in a bad part of town. When the robbers looked away, the cleaner's owner took the opportunity to grab a weapon and disarm the robber. The robber turned and ran, misjudged, and went through the glass door. Police arrived on scene and noted, among the shards of broken glass on the cleaner's floor, a hunk of something flesh-colored. It turned out to be a piece of human ear. Detective retrieves the hunk of ear and goes to the county's hospital emergency room. Shortly after the detective arrives at the ER, a man who matches the robber's description walks in, holding a towel to the side of his head. Detective asks to look and sees that a hunk of the man's ear had been cut off. Detective holds up the piece of ear he retrieved from the crime scene, and sure enough, it's a perfect fit. He places the man under arrest and waits while the ER doc sews the hunk back onto the arrestee's ear. He asks, "Why on earth did you decide to rob a dry cleaners of all places?" And the arrestee replies, "I've been watching that dry cleaners for a while. I'm sure they've taken a lot of cash. I noticed that there's an armored car there twice a day." The detective explains, "Yes, the armored car is there every morning to drop off police uniforms for dry cleaning and returns every afternoon to pick them up after they've been cleaned." Took a vehicle burglary report where the victim found a driver's license on her driver's seat that the suspect must have left behind. It seems damning, but if he had any criminal smarts, he'd just say his license was stolen and the thief would have dropped it while breaking into his new victim's vehicle. Without any other evidence, the case would have gone nowhere. The next day, I take a report at a church that was a couple of blocks away from the vehicle burglary. This guy stole the video cameras from the building. He must have thought the footage came with the camera because when we checked the video, there was a high-def close-up of the suspect's face as he removed the camera. Good evidence, sure, but I still didn't know who the guy was until I looked at the license I collected the day prior and saw that it was the exact same guy. My dad's a cop, and I remember that he called me one night and said he wanted to tell me how glad he was that I'm not as stupid as the guy he'd just arrested that night. An idiot high schooler was caught stealing booze after his fake ID was rejected. His fake ID said he was born in 2001, 3 years younger than he actually was. The poor guy couldn't work out why his ID didn't work. My dad recommended that he pay better attention in math class. I'm a 911 dispatcher in Florida. Sometimes confused or drunk people knock on the wrong door or try to get into a house thinking it's theirs, but it isn't. It's an honest mistake. But the homeowner is rightfully very afraid, thinking that they're about to be robbed or worse. Well, I had this kid, must have been in his early 20s and clearly on something, calling me going absolutely crazy that someone was trying to kill him and take his property and commit the unspeakable act on his girlfriend, etc. I send units code 3 to this guy thinking it's a burglary in progress. Turns out the guy just ordered a pizza and forgot about it. We scared the delivery guy half to death. Worked as a surveillance contractor and was asked to find footage of a copper heist. They'd been ripping all the external piping from old school buildings. It was crappy CCTV and at night, so not much hope of identification. A couple of cameras were offline, so I went back to check why. Turns out they came back a second night and ran out of copper to steal. Perfect face shots of the guy jimmying it from the front. He had his t-shirt pulled up over his face, and he'd quickly pull it back up as it fell off constantly. At one point, he yanked the cam down to reveal his partner being used as a stepladder. When Thief 1 got tuckered out, they swapped, and Thief 2 did the same thing. The constable took one look and was like, "Oh yeah, I know them. I'll go pick them up now." One of my finest moments was when I drunkenly gave a cop a fake ID and then said, "Oh wait, can I have that one back?" And he was like, "That one?" No. Can't go into too much detail, but one youth shot another in the leg after a fight in their apartment complex. The victim was able to describe the weapon the shooter used in detail. We got the perp's name from another kid who knows him from school. My partner looks up his Instagram and wouldn't you know it, there he is posing with the weapon described to us exactly. Social media is a treasure trove of wannabe gangsters incriminating themselves. Went to a job of 2 males attempting to break into a car. Job description said that they'd been at it for at least an hour. Got there, and the car was theirs. They'd apparently locked themselves out. Checks confirmed it did indeed belong to one of their mums. On their person was stolen mail and heaps of phones and new stuff in boxes in the car, so they got arrested for theft anyway. It ended up that the driver's door they'd been trying to break into was the only locked door out of the 4. It was unlocked everywhere else the whole time they were there. Mail turned out to be junk mail and 1 wedding invitation. Well, yes. I was about to say that you can't necessarily be blamed for being caught in an incidental search of their person, but those final details definitely launched these lads into the stupid criminal semi-finals. Well done, guys. A few more heists like this and you could take home the grand prize. Teen gets fired from Red Lobster, returns to rob same restaurant that night. They refuse to give him money from the register, so he grabs the charity coin box, muscular dystrophy or something like that, and then he leaves on a bicycle. I left to go find him and saw coins scattered about, followed the trail off some time which leads me to him hiding in the bushes at a church. Bicycle was leaning up against the bush that he was in. Oh, from my local newspaper. 2 young men in a pickup truck on a back road stopped a courting Amish couple in a buggy and told the couple to give them all of their money. Spoiler alert, the Amish generally don't have money. They do have good memories though, and told the cops the license plate number. The inept criminals were locals too and should have known better than to try and rob the Amish. The Amish are not to be trifled with, see? They can and will aggressively hand-carve you a set of high-quality table and chairs. They can also weld like no one's business. Beware the Amish. We had an inmate that would constantly call Crime Stoppers on his contraband cell phone and try to get them to give him the reward if he confessed to his crimes. He did this several times a month. I'm not a cop myself, but about 10 years ago I got held up and robbed by a group of 3 guys with knives. All they wanted was the money in my wallet, so me being the smart guy not wanting to mess with knives just obliged. At the end of the ordeal, he put the knife to my throat and said, "If you ever tell the cops my name is," and gave me his name, "I'll slice your throat right now." So I went home, called the cops, told him where it happened, and gave them the name the guy told me. The name instantly rung a bell with them since the guy had come into contact with the police in the past. The cops went to the spot where I was robbed, and they were laying an ambush for a new guy to appear. They could instantly identify the guy, he was arrested, and that's about it. It happened in the Netherlands. I don't know his sentence or anything. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went to a domestic violence school where the woman claimed her husband had hit her. When I asked her how it happened, she told me he couldn't provide the kind of life she wanted him to give her. She stated since he'd had a heart attack and got lupus, he wasn't working, so she decided she'd start inviting some friends over to do the deed with her for money. Mind you, she's telling me, a fully uniformed officer, all of this. She says he should act as the person who handles the money for her, i.e. her pimp. She then calls someone to come over and tells her husband that after she gets paid for the act, he should hold the guy at knife point and take the rest of his money. She said he refused to help her with this, so they got into an argument. He pushed past her to get out of the apartment. She claimed that was the attack that she had called me for. I asked her if she understood she had just admitted to planning a felony crime. She looked shocked that planning a working girl and robbery was wrong at all, and didn't get why I wasn't arresting her husband for trying to remove himself from her stupid plan to get them both arrested. For all of those asking if I arrested her, I did not. The husband is the real hero here. Due to him refusing to be involved in anything, this plan of hers never actually made it off the ground. If the victim had actually been invited over, I could have arrested her for an offense. I did write a report and passed it along to the robbery and vice units, as well as notifying my supervisors. Best I could do that night was separating them. I drove the husband across town to remove him from the situation. The penal code in each state differs slightly on what charges are considered arrestable while still in the planning stages. This wasn't something I could arrest on, mainly due to not having a direct victim I could point to. Basically, because this was a what-if scenario, it would be the equivalent of me mumbling to myself I should punch that guy in the face. If someone had been invited over or I'd gotten the name for the possible victim, I could have arrested her for it then. In short, being stupid and making stupid plans isn't a crime. Crimes require victims. My buddy is a cop and told me about this one kid in particular he dealt with for years. No cleverness to him, numerous times he walked into his neighbor's garage in broad daylight and just stole his bike. Constantly stole from stores in plain view, even the occasional minor attack or burglary. He always got caught, like never had gotten away with any of his hundreds of crimes, but because he was a minor, there were never any real repercussions. A few days before he turned 18, my friend and another officer went to his house to basically remind him that if he did anything after that, he'll face real punishment as an adult and he'll get 0 breaks. It was a last-ditch effort to be helpful. 2 days after his 18th birthday, he was caught committing an armed robbery. Pretty sure he's doing a few decades behind bars now. Not a cop, but worked at a 7-Eleven in a rough part of Chicago. Had 2 guys come in and ask for 2 bottles of Grey Goose. I asked for their IDs and they handed them over, and I grabbed the 2 bottles from behind the counter to ring them up. They proceeded to grab the bottles and book it out of there, leaving their IDs on the counter. I just called the police, they came in asking for a description of the thieves, and I handed them the IDs. The cops were in disbelief at the stupidity, left and went to the address of one of the IDs that was about 2 blocks away. About 15 minutes later, they walked in with the 2 guys and bottles of Grey Goose. The poor guys didn't even have the chance to open them. I confirmed it was them, didn't press charges, took the bottles of Grey Goose back, and went on with my overnight shift. Oh, sweet boys. Some people are too stupid to take seriously even when they try really criminal stuff. I have to imagine that they were shuffling their feet and looking at the floor like 9-year-olds caught sneaking around after bedtime. I got a call a couple of years ago to a lady who said she was being threatened. I respond to a very rural area, and she shows me her cell phone, and it's a chain mail text from an unknown caller. The message showed a picture of a girl with a gag in her mouth, and she's looking at the camera and holding a sign with both hands that said, "Help." The text of the message stated she was in Amsterdam, and if she didn't forward the text to 10 people, look what happened to this other girl who didn't. I explained to this lady that it was a hoax and explained what a chainmail message is. She refused to believe me and became argumentative. When I offered to contact Interpol for her, she didn't know what that was, and that wasn't good enough, and just kept saying the girl needed help. I asked her if she knew the girl, and she said no, and believed that the girl tried to send her the message using any made-up numbers she could, instead of contacting anybody she knew. My reasoning was once again shot down, and she said again that the girl just needed her help. I remember driving away and the lady screaming at me that I needed to help that girl, and I responded with a single no over my PA as I quickly sped away. Neither of those women were ever heard from again. Forward this video on to 10 people. So I was sitting at the station doing paperwork. Looking out the window, and a few yards away is a bus stop. A young lad is smashing the glass of the bus stop as a way of showing off to a couple of girls. So I sigh, walk about 20 yards over to him, and arrest him. Another time, a lad had just broken into a pharmacy and stolen some substances, sleeping tablets, which he'd started taking, maybe to hide the evidence. Who knows how these people's minds work? There's a foot chase which gets slower and slower and slower, and I ended up just slowly walking up behind him. The guy fell asleep while I was booking him in. Once, when I went to the grocery store, there were a few officers inside getting statements from some of the staff. Apparently some guy had dropped a gallon-sized Ziploc bag full of smack right on the floor while he was walking out. Staff members noticed it right away and called the cops, right before the guy came back into the store demanding that the staff return his smack. He was still arguing with and threatening them when the police walked in the door. There was a kid who sold substances on the floor of my college dorm who wasn't the brightest. One night he was driving back to the dorm and a cop car came up behind him and turned on their lights. This idiot stored all of his stuff in his car and assumed they were pulling him over for possession. He proceeded to drive through a red light and pulled into the dorm parking lot to hide. Mind you, his car was covered in bumper stickers, had a kayak rack, and a vanity plate to top it all off. The parking lot only had one entrance and exit too. Apparently he thought the police car wouldn't go through a red light to follow him. Long story short, they were just going to warn him for having a taillight out and nothing more. Instead, he ended up in a local jail and expelled from the college. The funniest part is that his ledger of all transactions and the dollar amounts, his products and buyers, was right there in his car. He was one stupid criminal. Ex-police officer here. I pulled over a guy for having a brake light out. Nothing serious. Ran his plates and the likes. It all came back clean and nothing seemed off until he exclaimed, "I haven't had any alcohol," in an over-enthusiastic tone. For some reason, he just thought saying this was a good idea. So, nearly got away with it. Vodka doesn't smell. I breathalyzed him, and the legal limit in England is 35. He blew over 60, arrested on the spot, and his vehicle was towed. Idiot. My father is a police officer. He once told me a story of a call he went to for reports of a man and woman fighting in an apartment. The call came from neighbors for noise complaints and concern. He was third shift, so this was at some point very late at night, when all the crazy people were up and at him. When he arrived, he could hear the yelling through the door. He knocked and let them know it was the police. There was immediate silence and a man answered the door completely undressed. The exposed man didn't even give my dad a chance to speak or ask questions. The first thing he said was, "I don't have a knife behind my back." Well, he definitely did have a knife behind his back, and the woman he was with had smack, which is what they were fighting over. They both got arrested that night. Pro tip, don't do illegal substances, and if you do, don't answer the door for the cops. As a teacher, I remember asking a student who was looking a bit out of it what was up. Sleepily, she replies, "Didn't get much sleep. I ask her if everything's fine, as you'd normally do. Yeah, it's okay. My uncle got arrested last night, though. The school was in a low socio-economic area, so it's not as unusual as you'd think. Anyway, she tells the story. Uncle's so stupid. He and his mate thought it would be a good idea to steal a local ATM. They smashed through the windows, put chains around it, and dragged it out with their big truck. They decided it worked well, so they ended up dragging it all the way home. And she gives a half smile. The thing is, the cops found them easy. They just followed the marks on the road all the way to the front door. I knew this kid in high school who got pulled over for a minor traffic violation. He decided it would be funny to jump out of the car and book it down the street. The cops, of course, go chasing after him, and after a couple of blocks he stops, puts his hands in the air and yells, "Psych!" The cops didn't think it was funny, so they tackled him to the ground and put him under arrest. His parents were wealthy, so he didn't get in that much trouble, but it was still so incredibly stupid. Just for the record, I think that everyone who's caught mid-crime should try this. It hurts nobody, and the idea of someone falling for it tickles me just so very much. Give it a go, bank robbers. You've got nothing to lose. See how it plays out. I'm Swiss. We got mandatory military service duty. When you do this, you usually get to keep your army rifle as a personal rifle at home for the following years, and every year there's a repetition course for about 3 weeks until you're 30 or something. During that time, you keep your weapon at home. You're supposed to keep it locked away, but most people I know just toss it in a corner of the attic or put it below the bed or something. And no, you don't get to keep any ammo. Anyway, a friend was having a party at home. Some friends called him that they're going to show up at his place soon. The door rings, and he's pretty drunk, and he thinks it's a fun idea to take the rifle, unloaded and without any ammo, but still, and open the door and point it out to scare his friends. Unfortunately, it wasn't his friends, but the cops, called by a neighbor because of the noise disturbance. I don't know all the details, but he doesn't have that weapon anymore. Still had to do the rest of his military service, but unarmed, which you can do without problems depending on your function within the army. He also probably paid a fine. Not a cop, but I used to work at a smoke shop. 3 guys broke in through a large window, left blood everywhere just trying to get in, walked right past the high-end, fancy, expensive glass, and proceeded to grab as many cheap glass pipes as possible. They went back through the window, breaking 2 or 3 of these pipes in the process of crawling through the tiny hole they'd made, probably cutting themselves even more than they had already had, and hightailed it across the street. They seemed to have dropped damn near everything while running because there was literally a trail of broken glass leading to the apartment across the street. Cops came, followed the glass trail leading directly to someone's door, looked over the little fence to their bottom floor balcony and saw 3 guys all cut up, smoking from a broken pipe. We estimate they took 8 or 9 pipes. They were smoking with the sole survivor. They turned out to be regulars in that store. Never saw them again after that. What is the dumbest advice you've heard from an idiot? Well, relationship falling to pieces? Have a baby. To be on the safe side, it should be phrased as, if you have trouble in your relationship, have a baby. You'll soon forget all about your current trouble. One of my stepdaughters said, I never carry any ID. That way when the police pull you over, they can't tell if you have warrants or not. Yeah, that'll work. I had a health science teacher, in college, mind you, tell the entire class they should all just stop taking their prescription meds because that's what's killing you. That laying with a virgin cures human immunodeficiency virus. Oh, your pen stopped working? Take the ink tube out and suck on the open end of it. That'll make it work again. You can guess what happened. That you can blast bleach up your hoo-ha to clean up the little swimmers, stopping them from making you pregnant after doing the deed. My dad worked as a car salesman for 1 year back in the late 90s. I graduated college in 99 and got my first real job that fall. I'd been driving my grandfather's '82 Chevy Celebrity, which reeked of cigar smoke, and started commuting from rural Maryland to Beltway, Virginia, which was about an hour. I got in an accident involving a deer carcass, bent the frame. My father recommended getting a new car. I'd only 1 or 2 paychecks under my belt, and instead of advising me to look for something used or just doing what I could to keep the Celebrity going, he said I should go to his old dealership, talk to his friend, and get a brand new 2000 VW Jetta. He said since I'd just graduated college, the best plan would be to sign a student lease. That is, a lease with a limit of 15,000 miles a year, despite my 100-mile-a-day commute. I did exactly what he recommended. Totally my fault for not doing the math. I was a dumb kid, too excited by the thought of getting my first brand new car per parental recommendation. I eagerly put a whopping $1,000 down. Cut to 4 years later, the balloon hits and I'm over double the allotted miles. Following my dad's advice, I wound up paying about 30 grand for a 16 grand vehicle. I know this one woman who has serious genetic abnormalities, and if she were to get pregnant, she needs to be monitored by specialists prior to conception and labeled high risk, as one specific health problem could cause the child she carries to develop brain damage or life-threatening congenital problems. Her preacher told her it was wrong to use birth control, or get ultrasounds, or give birth in a hospital, or vaccinate her children. So, she's not getting any healthcare whatsoever besides homeopathy and prayer at church. She's encouraging others with the same condition to live the same lifestyle, because she has one borderline healthy child, not mentioning the other one who didn't make it. Listen, I know none of you like Mr. Liberal wishy-washy narrator voicing his opinions on this stuff, but get your medical advice from medical professionals and your spiritual advice from spiritual professionals. My son's father was a horrible alcoholic. He'd disappear for days at a time. I can't tell you how many times I was told to stick it out just because we had a child together. My 8th grade teacher told us when we got to college to not go to class because the professors like and respect you more if you skip class to figure out the material on your own. I'm glad I didn't listen to that advice. A Christian friend explained that God wanted me to stay a virgin until marriage, but doing it in the butt was totally okay. Apparently, the Lord is very concerned about the intactness of one part of my hoo-ha, but is totally cool with me taking it in the pooper. Go to ITT Tech. It's great. I got so close to doing that, and I'm so glad that I didn't. It was ridiculously expensive and the degree is worthless, but they make it so easy to get into the school and arrange financial aid and student loans. They have recruiters who are good at taking advantage of poor kids like I was. For anyone listening to this, do not do it. No for-profit school is worth it. ITT Tech, University of Phoenix, Devry, those ones. They're all essentially scams. Go to a local public community college or technical college instead. If you're in a bad financial situation, you can work out the same aid through them, but it will be far cheaper. I actually got paid to go to school in my case, and you'll get a degree that will actually get you a job, especially if it's a technical degree. Join the army, they said. See the world, they said. The day I realized I needed to stop taking career advice from my dad was when he said the following when I was about 17. Everyone goes into computers now. Too many people. All the people your brother's age went into computers at university, so there's no point in you doing it. You need to do something different if you want to find a job. I now live with a 29-year-old app developer who earns £45,000. It was terrible advice from a man who was too old to really understand that computers weren't just a fad. Here, take these naturopath salt tablets for your high blood pressure. You need a gaming computer? Get an Alienware. If the poop won't come out, just push and push as hard as you can until it does. Funny story, back in high school I used to wrestle. A common way to make weight, i.e. weigh under a certain amount to fight at that weight class, was to poop, an easy loss of 1 to 2 pounds. A friend of mine was half a pound overweight, so he went to unleash his bowels. A few minutes later he came out of the bathroom, face beet red and toilet paper hanging out of his pants. During the process of defecating, he found himself constipated. Desperate to force it out, he pushed as hard as he could and ended up bursting several blood vessels in his butt. Blood everywhere. Needless to say, he didn't wrestle that day. This one friend of the family, his wife of more than 20 years, dies from cancer. Now, ex-sister-in-law practically berates him at the dinner table, telling him that now is not the time for being selfish and grieving, the way he wanted, which was moving in with the family to be supported until he got disability housing because he's blind. Nobody had a problem with this apart from his sister. I never wanted to smash someone's face into the dinner table so badly. What an absolute C-word. Here, take this homeopathic vaccine. It's better than the dangerous stuff your doctor wants to give you. When my dad was younger, his older sister had food poisoning, and from what I remember, it was pretty sudden and violent. They called the doctor, and I guess buying Ipecac would have taken too long or something, but he told my grandma to just keep making her eat raw eggs until she puked up what was making her feel ill. Also, my other grandma was told, even though she was not a smoker, to pick up smoking when she was pregnant with her second child, my mum, because her first one was a big baby and the smoking would make the next one attractively small. Svelte, if you will. Had a guy in welding class try to tell me it would be just fine if we connected the oxygen tank to the line that carried argon for TIG welding. A gas is a gas, this'll work just as good. I personally shudder to think about what might have happened if someone struck a welding arc in the presence of pure, extremely reactive oxygen. I mean, hell, the whole point of using argon is to shield your weld from oxygen contamination. Also, oxygen tanks typically have reverse threads to keep idiots like that guy from connecting them to the wrong gas line. Oh, nothing bad's gonna happen, just keep doing the deed with the toaster. Living with debt is okay, you never really have to pay it off. Thanks, fellow medical students. Yeah, everybody has a water buffalo. Load of bullcrap. Where's my water buffalo? The narrator wondered what piece of pop culture he was missing out on with this comment, so he googled it, and it appears that even in my mid-30s, with my Christian days well behind me, I can't escape from VeggieTales. Thank you, whoever submitted that. Abstinence-only education is effective. The owner of an outdoor summer camp I used to go to did a big lecture about sun protection at the beginning of each week, and always carefully explained that people with darker skin didn't need to wear any. In February 2011, I was denied a UK PSW visa after I completed my Master in Science. The problem was on my end, so I've got no one to blame. Essentially, I screwed up part of the maintenance section of the application. It wasn't that I didn't meet the qualifications, it was just that I filled out the section wrong. I was given a week's time to either leave the country or to appeal the decision. In that time, I spoke to a few immigration solicitors on the best course of action. The first solicitor I spoke with told me that I'd be stupid not to appeal, because that would extend my leave in the UK for as long as the appeal takes. He also said I was stupid to not hire a solicitor in the first place, because I wouldn't be in this mess if I did. Then he told me that I was guaranteed to lose my appeal, but I should hire him anyway because at least he knows what he's doing. This would cost me £140 for the appeal and £1,500 for the hiring of this solicitor. No, thank you. Another solicitor I spoke with told me to go ahead with the appeal but to also submit a fresh application. His logic was this. By submitting an appeal, my leave to remain in the UK would be extended until the appeal took place. And because I did meet the qualifications, a new application would be accepted if I filled it in correctly this time around. This sounded like solid advice, so I researched the possibility of doing this. According to the UK BA, you are not allowed to do this. Your appeal and new application get thrown out, of course after they process the £561 visa fee and the £140 appeal fee. I ended up submitting the appeal, but with advice like this, I could not in my right mind ever consider hiring a solicitor. I ended up representing myself in immigration court and I won my appeal. In short, my UK visa was denied, I ignored the advice of immigration solicitors, and won my appeal because I didn't listen to them. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Johnnies don't work against human immunodeficiency virus. I heard this from a generally intelligent, albeit very Christian young lady doing outreach work with inner-city teens. I had to sit her down for a talk. The last thing those kids need is one more person reinforcing the idea that since Johnnies don't always work, there's no point in using them. Everything will work itself out? No, it frickin' doesn't. I fix everything, and then they say, see, it all worked out. I'm so sick of hearing that. Wait until you're married. Is the whole no doing the deed before marriage a typical or common American thing? Because I've never once heard anyone give that advice to anyone in the UK. The closest thing I've heard is make sure you're safe, but of course that's actually good advice. Canadian here, my mother's family are very religious, small-town people. I've got a few cousins who got married right out of high school, mostly because they wanted to do the deed with each other, but they're taught that it was wrong to do that before they were married. Okay, now double-click on Internet Explorer. Every time I hear a parent tell me they won't vaccinate their kid because it'll make them autistic, I want to strangle them. I don't want to catch some medieval plague just because they're stupid enough to believe everything they hear or read. Do some research, people. Vaccines may cause some complications in very few people, but the benefits they provide, specifically in preventing global pandemics, far outweigh the risks. Every rose has its thorn. Actually, there are several varieties of thornless roses, just as there are plenty of cowboys who don't even sing. Many years ago, I lived in California and was getting a divorce, during a time the state had decided to add mandatory counseling because of the high divorce rates. So I was waiting, and I can hear everything that's being said by the person in the counseling booth. The woman is crying and saying that her husband has been drinking and making her life miserable since his release from jail. The counselor's response? Listen, you can either break up your family or accept him the way he is. Worst advice ever. Not too bad or anything, but there's a bus route that recently got combined into another route. The 510 no longer comes around, it's only the 509 now. This lady gets on the bus and asks if the 59 goes on the same route as the 510. The bus driver says, sort of, and leaves it at that. The lady asks again, where does this bus go? The driver says, where do you want to go? I don't know, I just know it's on the 510 line. He looks at her blankly. She then says, never mind, I'll just wait for the 510. Okay, you do that. I felt bad for the lady because she left before I could even speak up. The stupid bus driver made her wait in the rain for a bus that would never come. I mean, sure, she was a bit lost and she should know where she's trying to go, but that bus driver was the worst. Go scatter your loved one's ashes wherever. I'm now a funeral director, and there's a huge list of places where it's illegal to scatter them. Most state parks, for example. Families can get fined huge amounts. Cremated remains have no nutritional value and can actually smother plant life in amounts larger than a scattering or dusting. Do not put them directly on your plant's soil. Opposites attract. What is true for magnets is not true for human beings. Also, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I think that's one of the worst pieces of advice that's commonly given to children throughout the lower levels of grade school. How can you tell a child this and then explain to him why using a racial slur is wrong or why bullying is wrong? Well, I agree with all of these points, in particular about how vocal discrimination and attacks aren't just something you should be expected to walk off. Although, in defense of that crappy sticks and stones saying, it's not as if it follows up with, so go out and insult people because it doesn't matter. The director of a charity bicycling organization to new riders said, don't worry about picking up biking gloves, you don't need them. In addition to protecting your hands in the case of a fall, which is only like 1% of their function, cycling gloves protect two nerves that run through your palms. Leaning on handlebars for long periods of time dulls these nerves, and that makes your hand numb and difficult to move. Particularly, it makes it hard to form a fist, which is how you frickin' brake on a bicycle and prevent huge accidents. Gosh darn it. The food pyramid is a total mess. No wonder there's an obesity crisis. You need to learn cursive. You'll use it for the rest of your life. Thanks, third grade teacher. Never change yourself for your boyfriend or girlfriend. If you're a crappy person and are hurting your significant other because of your crappy qualities, then it's always better to change. Also, sometimes small sacrifices are okay to be made if it means maintaining a happy relationship. I feel like part of the reason there's so many divorces is because everyone is being told not to change. You can take this, it's herbal, so it won't interact with any of your other medications. YOLO! But then again, not everyone believes in reincarnation like I do. iPhones don't use Flash, that's why they don't get viruses. You shouldn't even want to have a girlfriend until you're 22 years old, said my dad. My mum said I should wait until I was 23. Screw them both for making me feel crappy about talking to girls at 17. This crap. Yeah, I hate it. Being a girl, so many moms act like it's scandalous to have urges before then. Screw you for thinking there's something wrong with me because I started feeling funny down there when I was 13. That no one will love you unless you lose weight. Drop out now because you'll never amount to anything. Don't vaccinate your kids. That one really infuriates me. There's always money in the banana stand. I checked. Putting a spoon in the mouth of someone having a seizure. Don't do this, they'll choke on top of their other problems. Cleaning the aquarium out with soap and water. Think of the fish. Applying to law school. You can't OD on Tylenol. Lift with your back, put a real arch in it. You can put more weight on that way. Learning about Shakespeare's The Tempest for my English A-level, and we get to the mask section. The teacher says, I'll give you a brief overview because it's not that important and they never ask you about it in the exam. Exam day arrives, the teacher says, okay everyone, turn over your paper, your time starts now. 50 pupils open to a 15 marker on the significance of the mask in the play. This wasn't life-changing, but it was entertaining. I was good friends with an Asian exchange student in high school. We had to do a presentation for class, and he wrote some story about dragons, but didn't know the word for dragon. I told him it was master, and then the word for alternatively rooster or a gentleman's downstairs organ. So he went to the front of the class and did a presentation in broken English, saying a rude word about 25 times. It might sound mean, but we were good friends, and these were the sort of things we did to each other. I went to a private Christian high school. In 9th grade, in lieu of life skills classes, we were required to attend a week-long abstinence seminar. During this week, we heard many outrageous lies, but the worst of all was Todd Atkins' little factoid about the female body not being able to get pregnant in the instance of the unspeakable act. Specifically, we were told that the human body releases a fear hormone that acts as a shield around the unfertilized egg. I remember most of my classmates believing this completely, as did the adults who were teaching it to us. So remember, ladies, if you got pregnant as a result of the unspeakable act, it's probably because you actually liked it. I know a guy who thought that if he drank enough Mountain Dew, it would sterilize his little swimmers so he could go without protection. My uncle was also in the Navy, and whenever he and his shipmates would make it to port, they'd briefly walk in front of the radar to sterilize themselves for several days. This was from my dad, the truck driver. Why are you going to college for engineering? You'll never have a pension. Just go get yourself a good union job. Surely the Conservatives can't be any worse than the New Labour. Overheard while working in a restaurant, go get a pan of water to put out that grease fire. I mean, this is terrible advice, but let's be honest. The fact that you can't put out a grease fire with water is a fact that probably just escapes a lot of people. It's one of those bits of common knowledge that barely qualifies as such. I once worked in a nursing home and overheard 2 black nurses berate this really nice black guy, also a nurse who was from Ethiopia, about not acting black American black. In my opinion, it was the man's sincerity and kind ways that made people like him so much. It made me kind of sick that they were trying to basically poison him against others. After having to cancel a job interview because of a rather severe family emergency, my father-in-law told me to next time just take my 3 children with me to the interviews. This would be bad enough without the added fact that my middle child has social difficulties and needs constant supervision. Don't unit test, it's stupid and you don't gain anything, said one junior to another. I overheard this over my headphones and music. There was a man in Glasgow, Scotland who'd been repeatedly shanked and was bleeding to death. His family didn't know what to do, but they'd heard of the phrase to rub salt in the wounds, so that's what they did. He died in agony. Horrifyingly wrong advice. Children can't grow to be healthy, happy, successful, reasonable people unless they're raised by both a heterosexual father and a heterosexual mother. If you climax while she's on top, she can't get pregnant, because gravity. I'm not sure how true this is, but an acquaintance of mine said her doctor told her to keep smoking throughout her pregnancy, or the baby risks going through nicotine withdrawal when it's born. I don't know a lot about babies, but it sounded like she just wanted an excuse to keep smoking. Fundy in my freshman year geology class told the class that erosion isn't real. Last year I had a gay roommate. During the year, I was having some girl problems and talking to a friend about it, and she said, "It's because your roommate's gay. You need to spend some time with manly men so you'll be interested in girls again." Never give up on someone you can't go a day without thinking about. That made a bad breakup worse because he held on to it for way too long. The physician who diagnosed me as being diabetic told me to just get more exercise and avoid sweets. I was already physically fit and an avid mountain bike rider. No advice to get AmITheA or see an endocrinologist, which I later did on my own. The specialist, of course, helped me create a sensible management plan. By the way, of the dozen diabetics I've known in my life, 11 were like me, not obese. Just saying because people tend to think diabetes is always the fault of the person who has it. Which animals are the biggest jerks in the zoo, and what do they do? Cassowaries. If anyone needed to go into their enclosure, there had to be 2 others in riot gear. Nothing makes you crap your pants more than scrambling behind those guys and hearing the karate kick of the gods smash a riot shield behind you. Aldabra tortoises. They have an outdoor pen, but obviously they're stuck in a smaller indoor enclosure during the colder months. They won't leave you the F alone. I was watering the plants at one point when 2 big males snuck up behind me and pinned me to the wall. I pinwheeled my arms and fell onto one's back and sort of got to ride him. Other times, they decide to sit right in front of the door. So you're stuck until you convince them to move. You certainly aren't going to move 500 pounds of turtle on your own. If you put a squeegee against the wall, they simply have to knock it over and sit on it. You got the hose out? Yep, they've got to sit on that too. Bringing out food? They'll sit right in the frickin' feed troughs. There's a teaching zoo near where I live, and a few years ago they had to evacuate due to a wildfire. Afterwards, the local paper did a piece on it and they interviewed the people who had to evacuate the animals. They have lions, water buffalo, cougars, hyenas, all kinds of large animals. Which one was the hardest to evacuate? The Galapagos tortoise. He's enormous, bad-tempered, and much more difficult to train than most of the other animals. Getting him out of his enclosure and onto a truck was apparently quite the challenge, especially given the short time frame they had for evacuation. I wasn't there at the time this happened, but I used to volunteer at the Omaha Zoo, and there was the story of Fu Manchu the orangutan. Apparently, one of the keepers found Fu and some of his buddies hanging out outside of their enclosure and ushered them back in. When it happened again, the keeper thought that someone was leaving the enclosure open. It happened so much that someone was about to get fired over it. Finally, someone witnessed Fu climbing through an air vent to get to the door, pulling it open enough to expose a gap, and then pulling a piece of wire from his mouth and using the wire to undo the latch and open the door. He had been hiding the wire in between his gums and lips to engineer his escape. It was only a jerk move because he almost got people fired. Otherwise, it was slick as hell. I grew up in St. Louis and went to the zoo a lot when I was a kid. Once I watched 3 jerky kids throwing stuff at a hippo. I was furious, but just stood there because I didn't want to get beat up. And I swear to God, that hippo turned slowly, backed up as close as possible to the moat, and then targeted these kids with a spray of hippo diarrhea in a flow that was truly unbelievable in volume and accuracy. Well, I would say in this one particular instance, the hippos aren't being massive hyper-aggressive jerks. What were those kids thinking? Doesn't everyone know that they're at the top of the list of animals you don't want to mess with? A fate well deserved from them, at least. We had a kookaburra who'd catch lizards, snakes, frogs, and even earthworms so that he could feed them to you. You'd be standing around doing your job, and all of a sudden he'd show up on your shoulder trying to force-feed you a lizard he'd whacked on the ground 30 times. Oh, and by the way, if you covered your mouth, why not try the ear? The ear is a great place to put a dead lizard or live earthworm, apparently. Ah, mate, you're not wrong. I nursed a cookie chick I found when I was still in high school, and once she had matured, she basically became my self-appointed nursemaid. We called her Mon, short for monster, Cookie Monster, get it? And she'd sit outside my window at times when even the sun would be telling you to F off and get back to bed, and subtly smash a snake or lizard or whatever she'd decided to murder on my windowsill until I was awake and had let her in. Then came the struggle to identify what she had in her frickin' beak. If it was still alive, that is, and how to make sure she didn't touch its mangled body to my face. On a couple of occasions, she'd been fooled by something playing dead and let it loose on my bed. Not so great when it's a real angry carpet python who then proceeds to musk crap all over your bed and try to bite your face off like it was your frickin' idea. But there were the times that were awesome, like going down to the Chapman River for a swim and having her follow and watch over me from a tree and just laugh her head off. Or when she'd just get in the house and basically have a screaming match with my dad, which she always won. Or when she'd chase my little sister around the table, by running on the floor, not flying, like it was amusing her, whenever my sister tried to eat brekkie at the same table as me. That bird always had a way to put a smile on my dial, and I missed her something terrible when she finally never came home one morning. I still get all bittersweet when I hear one of them cacking itself. I work with squirrel monkeys, and I go in there with a little bowl of live mealworms for training purposes. One day, one particular monkey was being fairly grabby, reaching for my hair and whatnot. I'd closed up to their cage and was getting ready to leave when I noticed I hadn't slid a hatch shut. I moved closer to the fence to do it, and someone, I don't know who, but I'm betting it was the grabby one, shot a hand out of the cage reaching for the mealworms and knocked the bowl out of my hands. I don't know if you know this, but individual mealworms are hard to pick up off the floor, especially when they're crawling away as fast as their little legs can go. And so then, of course, all the monkeys are on the ground reaching through the fence to grab the little worms while I'm trying to scoop them back into the bowl as fast as I can. That must have been the greatest thing ever to them, like, holy crap, free worms everywhere! I did also have a capuchin monkey throw food at me. I ignored it because I was observing a different monkey at the time, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the one that I assume threw the food come up to the fence and stick her arm under the door to try and reclaim the food she'd thrown at me. but it was out of her reach. Karma. One time at Busch Gardens, I noticed that the then 2 female orangutans had acquired some materials, several sticks and some t-shirts. I imagine the shirts were for enrichment or something. Anyway, these 2 ladies had torn the t-shirts into approximately inch-wide strips and were clearly assembling a raft design with the sticks. See, their enclosure was surrounded by a moat, and I think they'd figured out this was their best shot at making a break for it. Meanwhile, the male orangutan had taken another t-shirt and just put his head through the neck hole. He hadn't put the t-shirt on, instead he draped it over his head and he'd lift up the bottom hem and play peekaboo with the tourists. I'm sure there are problem animals in other areas of my zoo as well, but the animal that's the biggest jerk that I've worked with takes the form of a baby camel. Now, most children don't think about camels as dangerous animals, but usually, after a quick Google search, it'll show you plenty of videos displaying just how strong and terrifying they can be. Fortunately, that's not an issue for us. All of our camels are well trained and pretty well behaved, so long as you don't leave anything sitting around them that you aren't prepared to have eaten by one of the giant lugs, except for this one camel. This baby camel was orphaned by her mother, so she's been raised by us for the most part. Usually, she's pretty sweet and fairly easy to get along with, but I've never seen an animal go through bigger mood swings than her. One moment she'll be rubbing up next to you looking for attention, but the next moment you have your back turned, she'll be half reared up and ready to kick. Then after failing to murder you, she'll try to come back to you for more affection like none of this ever happened. She'd use any reason as an excuse to try and attack one of us too. Oh, that stick that's been in my enclosure for a week and I've never reacted to? Now that you're in my enclosure as well, it's now clearly an attacker and I need to destroy everything in my immediate radius. Now I know what you're thinking, it's just a baby, right? What harm could she possibly do? Well, by 6 months she was already past 200 pounds and still growing. She'll easily pass 1,000 pounds when she's fully grown. So trying to lead her outside in the morning when she was in a homicidal mood was a hassle to say the least, dodging kicks and trying to hold on to her lead while she did her best to murder you. I'd easily say 90% of the injuries sustained on the job in our department were due to her. That being said, I still love the little Antichrist, and she's definitely started to calm down with age and take her training a bit better, but that couldn't come fast enough for most of our shins and ankles. Yep, camels are up there with hippos for me in the list of animals that I am not at all prepared to mess with. I've never met someone who's ridden one who didn't have a story about them being spitty, bitey, and bad-tempered. Do better, camels. I used to volunteer at a zoo, and the biggest jerk were the ravens. They were really smart and awesome for enrichment activities and for teaching classrooms, but if they got bored, they'd find a way to entertain themselves. One particular time, a raven decided to place some of its food right outside its caged enclosure to lure a peacock, and once the peacock got close and started to eat, the raven would sneak up and pluck the tail feathers off the peacock. I interned my senior year of undergrad at a zoo and I loved it. I wish I'd stuck with it. Here are the animals that I worked with. Snow leopards. The mom and dad were big jerks. Wouldn't actively attack or anything, but they just didn't want any interaction with us. We had a cub born the day before I started, so I got to help raise this little jerk. We tried to be as hands-on as possible when we weighed her every week, but that little cub was mean. I have scars from her, but it's a pretty cool story to say you have scars from a snow leopard. Papa Leopard almost knocked me out once. I got close to the fence to look for him. The fence was kind of that loose chain-link mesh steel, so it moved if you leaned on it. I went to look for him because we were trying to shift him inside for the evening. I lean on the fence and he comes out of nowhere and pounces on the fence right above my head, then trots inside. I don't think he was trying to eat me, just knock me on my butt. Then of course there are all the monkey jerks. Hanuman langurs. They are the worst. We had a mum and a daughter and they hated anything that was male, which I happened to be. I cleaned up their poo and fed them, but they still hissed and yelled at me. Francois Langur. This little guy was way cooler than his roommates. He had a faux hawk and knew where treats were kept in my pockets. He'd give you a pat down if you came by to visit. And the red pandas, the sweetest little things, they're basically slow and clumsy raccoons. They'd do anything for a grape or biscuit. And finally, the cougars, my favorite by far. These were the 2 cuddliest giants I've ever seen. One was like 100 pounds, and the other had a weight problem and was easily 200. The smaller one was a female, and I would have felt very comfortable if there was ever a reason I'd be locked in her cage alone. The big guy was very sweet as well, but I feel like instinct may kick in with him sometimes. They both loved scratches on their head and cheeks, and they'd purr. They were humongous house cats, basically. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've visited a popular wildlife rehabilitation center in South Africa called Maholaholo. I know, right? It's a great name. About 7 or 8 times. They have at the center arguably the world's most famous honey badger called Stoffel. Now, I'm sure none of you need an introduction to how frickin' savage these animals are, but this particular jerk has actually featured on multiple TV shows because of his antics. In the first few years of his life at the center, he dug his way into the lion enclosure twice and attacked the alpha male of the pride both times. How did he live through this, you ask? So the honey badger actually has this incredible survival mechanism. Their skin is really tough and really loose. When the lion clamped his jaws around Stoffel, he was actually able to rotate his skeleton within the skin and turn around to bite the lion on the nose. After the lion dropped him, Stoffel continued to terrorize the pride, but none of them wanted to be anywhere near him. I think eventually they had to tranquilize Stoffel so they could treat his wounds. When he kept digging his way under the wall of his enclosure, it had to be rebuilt 2 meters deeper into the soil. When he opened up cracks in the concrete and escaped, those had to be covered with metal sheets. When he used rocks and sticks to create a tower and climb over the wall, they removed them, only for him to steal a zookeeper's broom and climb out using that. He terrorized one of the staff regularly. The best was when Brian said he woke up to Stoffel's scraping at the door, so he grabbed a 10,000-volt stun gun from his cupboard and zapped the honey badger little jerk with it. Stoffel didn't move, didn't even flinch. Brian says he just got angrier and started growling. Brian had to climb out the window and lock all the doors while they worked out what to do about Stoffel. I know many more stories of his antics, but my favorite is how, after years of living on his own, they decided to find him a female companion to join him in the enclosure. And the first thing Stoffel did with his new wife, stood on her head and used her to climb over that wall again. Our local zoo used to have peacocks walking around freely. Those little jerks hated people, chased lots of small children before they got kicked out finally. Ex-zookeeper here, orangutans are super smart, super strong, and super jerks. Well, some are. We had a female who, if you were standing in front of her indoor enclosure, would spit and hit you in the mouth every damn time. And she'd smile. She grinned so big when it happened. Lesson learned. I've been behind the scenes at a zoo once in my life. It was while they were feeding the monkeys or primates or whatever the proper term is. An orangutan with a mouthful of fruit looked at me, sighted in, and launched a golf ball-sized wad of spit and fruit at me. Hit me straight in the mouth. As gross as it was one hell of a shot. Well, I believe that's the 4th orangutan story in this video, meaning that there are frontrunners just for sheer quantity of stories. Although, to be fair, most of theirs are just them playing mean pranks, not the eviscerate-y, scary stuff that the big cats and birds seem to get up to. A wallaby named Wallace Montgomery. He was hand-raised, translation a frickin' psycho, and then given to us when he became a wee bit overwhelming for his previous caretaker. Feeding time? Be prepared to be gouged by his razor-sharp nails, bit on your softest parts, and the bowl will be knocked out of your hands. Cleaning time? He'll grab your rake and shovel, hit you with them, and kick you when you try to bend down to pick up your stuff. Trying to give him fresh straw to sleep on? Nope. He shredded the bag it came in. He picked up the dirty, urine-filled straw and rubbed it all over you. I love him immensely, actually. Fun fact, if you pick him up mid-tantrum, he'll just lay his head on your shoulder and give you 3 solid minutes of snuggles before recommencing your attempted murder. When I worked as a zookeeper intern, I think the biggest jerks were the emus. It was the summer of 2004, and the emus shared an exhibit with the wallabies. The exhibit wasn't high security, it was essentially a fence made of dried bamboo stalks. Wallabies are super cute, and while we didn't have an area where they're in the same place as visitors, some zoos do. Wallabies are not typically threatening to visitors in any way. The emus, though, were big jerks. They constantly pecked at the wallabies and were generally a pain in the butt. They weren't separated because they didn't cause actual injuries. The wallabies eventually got their revenge and freedom, though. One night, one of the emus ran into the fence and sort of gently impaled itself. It wasn't badly injured, but it did fall down after the injury. So what did the wallabies do? They kicked it in the head until it was dead. The wallabies and emus were separated the next day. As a side note, zebras are jerks too. Our zebras shared an exhibit with the giraffes. We had a giraffe platform where visitors could feed the giraffes carrots, grain, and other goodies, according to the giraffe diet, of course. The zebras wanted the goodies and would kick the giraffes in the leg so the giraffes would drop their food. Then the zebras would eat it. Not quite the same thing, but I volunteered at an aquarium while in high school. I later worked at another aquarium, but that's beside the point. I used to talk at different exhibits. The worst was beluga whales. At least they were for me. It's the first stop and lots of people come, and I was just too anxious to go on mic in front of that many people. One of our whales was a young male. He interacted with the guests the most, often pushing his melon against the glass and blowing out water. There are videos of him with a mariachi band and at weddings during ceremonies. So yeah, a young male whale. Young male whales are excitable, if you catch my drift. Sometimes he'd get so excited, he would rub himself on the biggest piece of glass. He only seemed to do this on the busiest days or when we had lots of kids. Normally, I'd talk about other stuff and people just kind of pointed and laughed. Some people would ask what was happening, to which I'd reply, "Oh, you know how these young guys are," and people usually got it after that. One day, on a super busy day, the whale rubbed himself until he finished. Whale splooge for everyone to see. I was barely 16 at the time, and I was mortified when kids ran up to ask me what that explosion was. The whale just swims away, that smug jerk that he was. Oh, this one frickin' octopus. I was volunteering at an aquarium in the cephalopod section. One day the power was out, so we were on backup generators and we were running all over to make sure everything necessary to keep the animals alive was still running. The tanks where we kept the giant Pacific octopuses, these things are about 8 or 9 feet across, didn't have a solid top to close it up. Instead, the top portion of the tank is covered by astroturf. Octopus suckers can't work on astroturf, so they can't climb out. In theory, this witch jams herself into the water outtakes in her tank while no one is paying attention. Water keeps going in, but none can get out. She makes a frickin' waterfall out of the tank and tries to ride it to freedom. We caught her just after she flopped onto the floor. They're just too frickin' smart. Swans are pure devil spawn. They want to kill anything that moves near them. Sweet harmless baby ducks born in the pond? Initiate murder instinct. Man who feeds me and cleans my awful poo-poo every day? Start up the murder protocol. Even the dumbest of invertebrates know that we fed them and would be kinder. Swans see you bringing them out food from across the park and are furious that, "You stole my food I never had and put it in that bucket you're bringing toward me, and I'm going to beat the crap out of this groundhog near me because of it and then try to murder you." Swans are the worst. Imprinted raptors will try to mate with your head if you're not careful. This is especially problematic when you're dealing with large birds like eagles. Fortunately, the largest bird that's attempted this with me is a Mississippi kite, so I'm safe for now. Yeah, the narrator is fine in theory with most birds, but there's no denying that those guys do not think the same way that mammals do. I find pet birds very unnerving as they can be bitey, and then apparently, when they're not chomping at you, they're trying to couple with your head. Right now, my arch-nemesis is the short-tailed, leaf-nosed fruit bat. I'm an intern in a well-known zoo. We have a wet cave filled with about 1,000 of these little jerks. The door is surrounded by a wire cage. When we go to feed them, we just let the door open and let the bats fly into the cage. When we leave, we have to herd them into the cave. As an intern, I'm not allowed to touch them, so I put my hand up by them to guide them in. Except they don't like that and they'll fly right into my face and hover there for a few minutes. One day I was doing it by myself, and one of those little monsters would not get in the damn cave. I stood there for like 10 minutes doing jazz fingers, and he just hung in front of my face. Jerk. Monkeys. Definitely the monkeys. They're cunning, fast, and incredibly strong for their size, and they will find any opportunity to mess with you. Ironically, we had an enormous tiger that had been part of a circus, and while it weighed a couple of 100 pounds and could have just killed you with a swat of its paw, really it just wanted to be petted. It was more likely you would be crushed when it pushed its head against you for a good scruffing. I work with chimpanzees, and I'll tell you, when the girls are in estrus, which is kind of like being in heat for dogs, they are just downright mean to the males of their troops, sometimes even going as far as taking prized food items right out of the mouths of some of the lower-ranking males. I've also seen fights between chimpanzees, which is kind of normal as aggression is central to their social hierarchies, but the fights finally die down and everyone's making up with one another as they usually do, until one of the females who wasn't done arguing hands one of the males a rock to throw at another female who she was still mad at. This of course led to the fight starting all over again. I've worked in various wildlife rehab or research facilities, including a bird sanctuary where we did mist netting. which is setting up very fine nets between trees to catch songbirds, and banding of wild birds for research or population counts. I handled everything from thrushes to woodpeckers to crows to sparrows, and you know who the biggest jerks were? Fricking chickadees. Most of the birds were scared or curious when we took them out of the nets, but the chickadees? They were mad. There was something bizarrely respectable about it. Here I am, holding a bird smaller than the palm of my hand, whose head I could crush with my frickin' thumb, and it's going, "You may be bigger than me, but if you don't let go of me, I'll rip your frickin' cuticle off." As an aside, the woman who owned and ran one of these rehabs where I worked had rescued and cared for wolves, bears, lynx, mountain lions. The one animal that put her in the frickin' hospital? It was a white-tailed deer. It gored the crap out of her. Ooh, in the same facility, our female black bear loved rainy days. She'd wait until a school or tour group got up nice and close to her enclosure, then gave the wet ground an almighty whack with her front paw and sprayed the entire group with mud. She did that every damn time. When did you realize that your parents were master criminals? If we were at home and they yelled, "Pigs!" we were to hide behind the couch and be silent. If we were in the car and they yelled, "Pigs!" we had to lie down on the floor and not move a muscle. I was kidnapped in grade 3 by my dad's supplier. He held us for 2 days. We had no idea. My sister and I met him before, loads of times. When he showed up at school and said our parents were on vacation and to go with him, we did. They had soda and Oreos and a puppy and a Sega Genesis, and it was the best weekend of my life. I found out 20 years later when my mum was complaining about never having had a vacation in her life. I reminded her of that vacation and she said, "You idiot, you were kidnapped." Oh, cool. My blood father was a substance dealer and he often came home with some really nifty stuff. I later found out it was stuff he got from people who didn't have cash on them but still wanted to buy. I think the thing I feel most guilty about was a Game Boy Advance I was given that we'd either only have for a little while or have forever. And when he said that, it was usually forever. It had a heap of games with it, and I went through and started new games on all of them, erasing the existing save files. Well, he took that one back after a month, so I guess whoever it was paid up, and I feel really sorry for that kid. Mummy or Daddy had needed a fix and used their Game Boy Advance as collateral, and when they got it back, all of their saves were gone. I was only a kid at the time and didn't really know the context in which I was handed the thing, but I know it belonged to a kid since there were quite a few young child learning game cartridges alongside Mario and Pokemon. Not my parents, but a friend's dad gave us some solid advice that I always remembered. Remember, boys, don't break the law when you're breaking the law. It applies in so many ways. For example, don't run a stop sign when you're carrying in the car, or don't speed if your inspection is out of date, or don't get the police called for a noise complaint if you've had a beer while underage. He was a shady guy, but oddly wise in many ways. I mean, I knew it was illegal, but probably growing all of that green herb outside when I was a kid. Dad was going to die of cancer, so he wanted to leave us some money. It was like diet Breaking Bad. Well, there it is, probably the most wholesome thing we're going to hear about in this particular video. Strap in, folks, it's probably all repressed trauma from here on out. My mum and dad are trained artists, and they would frequently counterfeit things like parking permits, coupons, doctor's notes, among other stuff. It was wild. Ours made us blow into breathalyzers so they could drive. My mum was the dealer. There are so many things I could list, but I'm on my phone, so just a few things off the top of my head. Smoking herb. When I was about 4, I chased my mum through the Woolworths pharmacy, shouting, "Mommy, Mommy, you dropped your special cigarette. Don't you want your special cigarette?" She hurried me out of there, shushing me, and I got a big talking to that afternoon. She also snorted white snow. I was in the 2nd grade when I got sent to the principal's office for teaching my friends how to make lines with salt and use part of a straw to snort it. My mum was real angry about that. We got told not to talk to cops or any straight people. I didn't know why at first, but I lived in terror of straight people. I got congratulations for making it through FBI questioning when I was probably 6 years old when they raided our land. SWAT teams are real scary. She taught me that bras and women's chests are great for smuggling. Cleaning out stems and seeds is a fun summer job. Don't say anyone's name on the phone. These are just a few things I can immediately recall. Oh, and I forgot to add how every now and then people in our circle of friends would move far away and change names, and we weren't ever allowed to call them by their old names. Mum also made us believe that morphine was an excellent pain reliever for almost anything. Which is true, but for a 6-year-old, maybe just a little Pamel or Tylenol for a headache is better. My dad was a tow truck driver and he'd always bring me little presents as a kid that he got out of people's tow cars. As far as I knew, if someone knew their car was going to get towed, they took everything they wanted out of it and the rest was fair game. Holy crap, same. My parents owned a repossession business when I was a kid. That's how I got my first computer. Someone had just left it in the car. Reading this thread makes me wonder about their business as a whole. My impression has always been that it was a legit business, but that my dad had just dodged taxes and eventually got caught. Now I'm thinking it's possible it was a front of some sort. My dad was investigated by the FBI for racketeering, but they were unable to press charges on him. He was also sued by a major financial entity for racketeering as well. Anyway, when I was a teenager, my dad had a lawsuit brought against him by multiple employees for unpaid overtime, and he ordered me to go through the boxes upstairs in a warehouse that would had to find all of their time cards. That storage area was a disaster. Papers everywhere. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find them, so I told my dad that it was no use, the time cards weren't there. My dad then yelled at me, telling me that he needed those time cards, and said that all of these people were trying to rip him off, so if I had to, just make up the time cards for them so that they were working 40 hours a week with no overtime, but don't bother telling him about what I did to get the time cards when I had them. I just had to have them for him one way or the other. I didn't think much about that last bit until I realized much later. But long story short, I ended up making time cards that he used for his case. He won. Realized several years later that my dad had used me for forgery, and when I confronted him about it, he just laughed and said that I was a minor at the time, and nobody puts a minor in jail for white-collar crime. I've run into some of those employees since then, and when they accosted me for being his daughter and how they'd want to punch my dad, or worse, if it was him they ran into, I've always confessed this to them. Ironically enough, they've all said that they'd punch him on my behalf too, because the fact that he used his own daughter annoyed them even more. And about the racketeering thing? He loved laughing about that and calling himself a Don. When I was going to take over the business several years later, after the forgery bit, his oldest employees gave me loyalty oaths, and I ran like hell. My dad absolutely was a racketeer. My boyfriend always talks about the stories of his dad having friends everywhere. Family would talk about how his now late father had friends no matter where he went in the city, and how great that was. And no matter where they stopped, he'd randomly know someone there. Then, as an adult, he realized that his dad just had dealers everywhere, and that's who he was always seeing. Oh, my mum. Shoplifting for the most part. I mean, like, she never made us do it, but she didn't hide what she was doing either. She's the reason model homes have cameras now. My dad stole a few things in a sneaky way so my brother and I would have one each. In one instance, for example, he bought a Game Boy game. He brought it back to the car, removed the cartridge, and took it back into the store saying the case was empty. He did the same thing with those Pikachu Tamagotchi things. I think his biggest steal was a PlayStation 2. He actually did pre-purchase one. My mum went in and picked it up, but when leaving the store, the door person didn't tear the receipt. So, my dad took the receipt back in, picked up another PS2, stuck the receipt on it and walked out. The door person tore the receipt this time, but obviously didn't pay attention to the time of sale. Dad also ran a huge, quote, business of installing chips in PlayStations so that they could play copied games. He'd rent games, burn a copy, then sell copies to other people. We had a whole library and catalogue of copied games, and Dad had quite a few customers. Looking back, I see how dodgy it was and why he told me not to tell too many people about it. My mum was put on house arrest for substance charges, had an ankle bracelet and a breathalyzer device that would go off at random times of the day to make sure she wasn't drinking. We had to have a whole separate landline for this purpose. As she got further into her house arrest, she'd start to really try to pull sly crap and take gambles on when her random screenings would be. She'd make me take the breathalyzers, and I think once or twice she even had me pee into a cigar case that she was planning on stuffing up her you-know-what to fudge the test. My memory is pretty hazy. The irony of all of this is that she got nabbed for failing a substance test, claiming that it was after getting Novocaine at the dentist's office. This was like 20 years ago, so I don't know if that was possible back then. If it was true, then it's hilarious because she felt like she didn't deserve to get caught, completely ignoring the fact that she did deserve to get all the other times she pulled her shady tricks. You know, it took me a long time to get over my confusion that not everyone at my school knew all of the police officers by name during the DARE program. It was a small town. Not because someone in my family was a cop, but because I thought they just showed up at everyone's houses all the time, just like me. It's funny how we assume everyone lives similar lives when we're kids. Oh, aside from all the really dark and permanently affecting implications of the stuff we're getting here, there's something so very cute and pure about this one, in a heartbreaking way. I thought the cops came and looked at everyone's house from time to time. Doesn't Officer Brian make sure your room is tidy too? My family did a lot of petty, trashy crime, like shoplifting, theft, muggings, substances, among other stuff. I thought it was normal for adults to just kind of go to jail every few years for a day or two, until I was 10. Now, my stepdad is out of my life, and my mum is too old or ill to do anything particularly bad. But my dad may have helped finance a district attorney's election, which has saved him mountains in legal fees for himself and the working girls he frequents. I don't know, and probably never will know, what my parents did. However, we'd leave the house at nighttime and go drive through certain parks. Occasionally, my parents would panic and tell us to hide. We had to crawl onto the floorboards in the back of a tiny Buick. My dad came home with injuries sometimes, and my mum always said he fell. And finally, in that particular town, they hated the cops. They claimed they were all corrupt, and maybe they were. I don't know. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My parents would often get me to answer the phone as a young kid, like 4 or 5 and older. Anyways, the people on the phone always asked if Jones Mollusk was there. My parents would coach me to say, "No, Jones Mollusk lives here. I don't know who that is." Well, as a kid, I really didn't have a clue who Jones Mollusk was because my dad was always just Dad or went by his nickname. I didn't click for years that that was actually his name. I guess I helped my parents evade a few debt collectors and God knows what else. Also, me and my sister used to go play Barbies in Daddy's clubhouse. It was our favorite place. Dad built it himself in our backyard, and they even had a big bar and pool table. They bought a velvet couch for me and my sister to play on while Dad played pool and visited with all of my uncles. Dad always called it his clubhouse, too. So when people asked where my dad was, I'd say Dad was probably in his clubhouse. To which my mum would always get so mad at me and I'd be so confused, because that's what Dad said, and everyone else called it that too. But I wasn't supposed to talk about it, apparently. Yeah, so my dad was in a biker gang. And let's see, there's probably some more stories from his wacky life. When he took us places like the aquarium or amusement parks, he always used to try and get us in cheaper. Well, one thing about me was that I was always a really oblivious child. This both helped and hurt him, such as those phone calls I talked about. I mean, I legitimately didn't know who Jones Mollusk was for years, guys. But in some cases, it also backfired. So once my dad was trying to get us into a park or something, and he lied about my age to get me in cheaper. Insulted immediately, I puffed up and said, "Dad, I am not 6, I am 7. Cue the eyebrow raise of the attendant and my dad puffing back, "You're freaking 6. Good times. I can't remember if we got in cheaper or not. Probably not. He was so angry. Afterwards, he told me, "If I say you're 6, you're freaking 6. Eyes roll. Dads are weird, I thought. My dad also hated cops growing up. He used to call them effing pigs. He'd always made snide remarks about cops just eating donuts and generally being useless. He'd get stopped a lot by them. I guess they knew about him and his general associates. Anyways, one day we stopped at a Wendy's and Tim Hortons split restaurant. Now, if you don't know, sometimes restaurants share a building together, and in this case, we were only separated by a short wall to the other side of Tim's. We were waiting for our burger, and me being like 4 or 5 whatever, I was up on my knees looking over the partition. Well, there on the other side was a table full of cops. I remember feeling shocked and suddenly exclaiming very loudly, "Dad, you're right! All of those pigs do is eat donuts!" My mother was mortified and she pulled me down to sit. The cops all looked over, I guess, and started laughing, luckily. My dad thought it was hilarious. My dad was a mechanic. The things that stick out was when he had charged for a new replacement part and then go to the local junkyard and get the part from there instead. If the customer asked up front, he'd be honest and offer the 2 options. The junkyard part, which would be cheap but likely reliable, or a new expensive part with a warranty. If they didn't ask most of the time, it was a junkyard part. Rarely got in trouble or called out since his prices were just a fraction of regular shops. Oh, and I guess the other main shady part was that he wasn't a legit, certified mechanic and most business was cash or under the table. His apprentice is now my mechanic and he learned from my dad's mistakes. He provides receipts, boxes, and shows me where he installed the new part, and it's always shiny and new, minus obvious grease handling and installation marks. substances. I had no idea they were illegal until I was a lot older than I should have been to understand they're illegal. My father was a grower and distributor to a well-known motorcycle club he was a part of. We grew up running around Mary J. Fields. I slept on a couch most of my childhood because all of the rooms had been converted into hydroponic setups. Our roof space was converted into storage where it was just garbage bags of the stuff, around 100 to 150 square meters, all stacked up on top of each other. And there was other stupid stuff too. Apparently owning unregistered weapons is illegal, and you need a driver's license to drive a vehicle. It was normal for people in my family to be in and out of jail. It was normal for most of them to have some sort of criminal record. We were always taught to not respect cops. For example, when my dad found green herb in my 16-year-old sister's car, instead of reprimanding her for having it, he reprimanded her for how easy it would be for the cops to find it. We were always watching mob movies and my dad would just gush about how classy and cool they were. It's just little stuff like that mostly, nothing super outrageous. I used to be told that everything was okay as long as you don't get caught. They kind of said it like a throwaway phrase, but I really took it to heart. It gave me a real lack of respect for any authority at all, and made it seem more like a game than real-life consequences. I'd do illegal stuff just to get the rush of wondering whether or not I'd be caught. Once I was caught, I'd just shrug and act like their winning didn't bother me. Kinda like their punishment was just them gloating about me getting caught. A family friend was in the import-export business for gemstones. I didn't realize it could be illegal to transport gems across international borders. We'd have gem parties where a dining table that can sit 12 would be completely covered in bowls of gems and jewelry to buy. Same as Tupperware parties, but for gems. Some stones my parents got appraised shocked their jeweler. Super rare colors of different stones that they'd never seen before. That one friend has gone legit and owns some mines in Africa now. Ugh. So legitimately probably the most evil person in this video. I can get being desperate or not being able to see another life for some of these people, but I'm willing to bet there was certainly conflict diamonds at that table, and that's a real conscious choice to invest in a human rights violation. I never knew we weren't allowed to drink at the local fair. Mum used to bring beer in a cooler when we went. I continued to not know until I was 21 and a cop stopped me when I was walking around with a beer in hand. Oh boy, this is bringing up very specific memories. My dad never said explicitly what he was doing was acceptable, but he certainly didn't tell me that this was wrong. Between the ages of 5 to 7, I'm not sure about the specific timeline on this, my mum was often working in the evenings while my dad was sporadically around. One night, while my mum was gone, Dad gathered me to go on an adventure. Usually this meant driving around the city and looking at stuff. Well, Dad pulls up to a hospital and parks. He sits with me in the car and gives me a script saying that we recently moved there. A lie. And that he had hurt his back while moving boxes. A complete fabrication. I play along because, hey, it's my dad, and sure, whatever he says goes. Any other specifics from that night are pretty hazy. I think he managed to talk his way into some sort of painkiller prescription. This was in the early noughties, so opioids aren't as visible as now. My dad has been in successful treatment since then, but man, that's a big memory that stands out for how messed up my younger life was. My dad's no serious criminal, but petty in every way, including the crime he commits. I was basically taught to play dumb, act like you belong, and you can do whatever you want. We snuck into VIP lounges, other people's buffets and parties at restaurants and events. He once lied to a ticketer at a movie theater and got mad when they couldn't find the tickets he ordered online. He had not ordered tickets, but there was a huge line and he didn't want to wait. We got in for free and cut a huge line. Also cut lines at Disney World and other sorts of places. I'm now very embarrassed when he does things like this, and would never act this way myself. I think I might have always been uncomfortable with it, which is why I so detest it now. But it's something that's always in my mind, like some sort of dark superpower I might have. To use it, I just have to stop having self-respect. Quite a few things. As a bit of backstory, my biological father was convicted of murder, got away with another murder through claiming self-defense, I've got no clue if that was true, and apparently had a third murder that he never got caught for. He would steal constantly, from people to things inside of stores. One of my earliest memories is wanting this super cute pink hat. I believe I was around 8. He put it on my head and told me to just walk to the car. I remember asking about paying and he said, "Don't worry, just walk." So little old me walks to the outside doors with her heart pounding, and the alarm goes off. I freeze and run back to my dad that was still shopping. The first lesson I remember I learned? You just need to keep walking when those alarms go off. He died a few years back. My brothers and I are decent people. My brother is a great dad, despite the example set for him by his dad. I grew up in a relatively hostile environment. So many people come up so much worse, so I'm not really complaining. In mine, my mum had a bunch of boyfriends. Most were cool, some were garbage. Nice ladies came to talk to me at school sometimes, and after the first visit, my mum coached me pretty hard about what to say. She definitely taught me that beer was just soda that grown-ups drank that only tastes good when you're grown up. So, "he drinks a lot of soda" came up a few times. Again, really not that bad, but come on, Ma, what the frick? I have fond memories of hanging out in the shed with my parents, me playing with my dolls and them harvesting their money trees, green herb being strewn all over the floor and hanging from the ceiling, the leaves made into a little bed for my Barbie to sleep in. There were a lot of weird things I didn't think much of as a kid but realized were messed up as an adult, like how our family moved 13 times in 15 years. I just assumed people got new houses all the time, and how sometimes I'd go to the freezer for some ice cream and find stacks of cash in the containers. Just weird stuff like that. My brother, who was much more than a decade older than me, was a substance dealer. A prominent one as well. He pretty much could get you anything. I've got fond memories of driving around at night with him, making stops to see his friends, and then him getting money. Sometimes clients would come to the house to pick up their stuff. I can remember getting bags of pills together. At the time, pills, specifically Oxy, were all the rage. He used to call himself a pharmacist. When we'd go out, you'd notice certain people would follow us. My brother would point them out. That's a detective, that's the DEA, etc. He died almost 10 years ago. I'm a professor who teaches criminology. Today, we're actually talking about substance trafficking, which naturally is my favorite crime and the one I've studied the most, from a young age. He had to weigh cash out on a scale so you don't actually have to count it. Taught me how to roll a wacky tobacco and how to use a gat. He gave me my first Xanax and my first beer. To be honest, he did the best for me with what he knew how to do. What was the craziest bachelor or bachelorette party you ever went to, and what happened at it? My grandfather used to tell a story about how he and his friends got the bachelor passed out and put him on a train. This would have been in Ohio in the 1930s. Apparently, the guy made it back for the wedding, but barely. At a friend's bachelorette party, mild fun and hilarity was had. Drinks, food, silly party games, the usual. The bachelor party was happening a few towns away, and the groom was staying in a hotel room overnight with a few of his college friends. His best man got him off his face and encouraged him to sleep with his ex, who had somehow been invited. He confesses it all to my friend the next morning. It was really awkward. The wedding was on, then off again, then on for a few days. They did end up getting hitched, but now they're divorced. I remember sitting there during the ceremony thinking, they won't last, and he confessed that he'd never actually been in love with her. Marriage just seemed like a good idea at the time. I climbed a medieval castle wall and found a load of reenactors camping inside. I announced I was taking the castle and tried to drunkenly fight a few knights. I was marched out the gate, my kingdom in ruins. With no siege engines or supply chain to speak of, your conquest was destined to fail. At least you fell in glorious combat rather than on the bathroom floor of some seedy motel. Up to this comment, I wondered if I should be one of those obnoxious girls who don't let their fiancé have bachelor parties, but the chance of this happening over the chance of him getting a transmissible disease from an exotic dancer might persuade me. My best man fell down some steps at an adult dance club and somehow got his foot stuck under something. Another groomsman helped him and broke his ankle in the process. It was black the next day and he was on crutches for the wedding 4 weeks later. My dad likes to tell the story of a bachelor party a friend of his had, where they liberated him of his clothes, then chained him to a tree in front of his in-laws to B's house and left him there. He had been passed out drunk, and the future in-laws got woken up by his horrified screaming at 6 a.m. The wedding still went off a few hours later. Depending on the in-laws and their expectations, I feel like this isn't necessarily a deal-breaker. It might be a matter of what country you're living in, but I feel like a lot of people would put it down to just lads being lads. Who knows? Although personally, I think people who have the party the night before are insane. Is that an American thing? Oh, my story happened to the mother of the groom at a wedding in West England in the 1980s. True story. The groom was to be taken to a pub the night before his wedding. Stag nights were much more local back then, and he got totally blitzed. His friends dragged him up the path unconscious to his house at 3 a.m., opened the front door with his key, and then dumped him on the front room sofa. One of his friends didn't think he looked quite right sprawled on his back on the sofa, so he went to the kitchen and found a sausage in the fridge. Returned to the living room, undid his friend's zip, inserted the sausage hanging out at the gap, and zipped up. They closed the curtains and disappeared into the night. In the morning, the groom's mum walked into the room, which was still dark, went to the window, threw open the curtains, turned around, and there was the family cat eating the sausage. Mother fainted, hit her head on a stone fireplace, and missed the wedding, and had to explain why there was a bandage on her head for the following week. The groom was never allowed to forget it. In the UK, they're known as stag do for the guys. One of my colleagues, quite a few years ago now, held his stag do the night before his wedding. Never a good idea, right? We hit a couple of pubs before going for a meal in a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, London. Afterwards, we got into a nightclub off Leicester Square. Long story short, my colleague disappeared. Got to midnight and we couldn't find him. He wasn't in the club, nowhere around it, wasn't answering his phone. We gave up in the end and went home. Got to church next day and there's the bridesmaid and the best man turning people away. Our colleague had apparently chatted up a girl in the nightclub and gone back to her place. So I guess he went too far. He didn't return to work as his now ex-fiancée also worked with us in the same department. That's how they met. So at least he didn't make things difficult at work. A friend of mine once told me about a guy she knew who accidentally touched an exotic dancer's butthole at his bachelor party, ended up sleeping with her and later found out he'd contracted herpes. We were mostly caught up on how one accidentally touches someone's butthole. Oops, sorry ma'am. Well, since we've already gone this far. A bachelor/bachelorette party seems much more fitting after a marriage or divorce than before. It's not me, but my cousin's husband went to Vegas for his party and of course cheated on her. She found out about that time and a few others. They're now divorced. Bottle thrown during a fight at an exotic dance club sliced the best man's face from right above the eye to below the left ear. He looked like a bloody mummy at the wedding. Not my story, but my friends. Number 1. The bachelorette party was held out of town. The bachelor party was in town. Bachelor party concluded with everyone going back to the bachelor's little apartment to drink more. The bride got home from a nice weekend at the spa with her ladies to a totally trashed apartment. Holes in the wall, fridge pushed over and broken, cigarette holes in the couch, lots of broken plates and pictures, and the wedding was called off. The second, a cousin of the bride gets mad at the groom for some reason. She sends him a video she shot from the bachelorette party. It's a short video of the bride-to-be getting serviced by a gentleman in the washroom while laughing and throwing gang signs. The video ended when the fellow in question splooges in the bride-to-be and she yells, "Oh crap!" That wedding was called off too. For my group of friends, our bachelor parties have been a couple of weeks before our respective weddings and usually involve camping, breweries, firing weapons, and steakhouses. Never exotic dance clubs or anything sleazy. I don't really understand the rationale of going to be around those kinds of people or acting like a single guy looking for women. The rude part of me wants to say that it's only acceptable if you're trashy. The less rude part wants to say people justify it with, "You'll never get to do this again, try to enjoy it one last time," or, "If you go out and don't have a desire to try and get with any of these women, it means you're truly committed to your fiancé and ready to tie the knot." But honestly, that seems like a pretty ridiculous excuse to me. Former workmate was at one where they had a stag do in Spain. After a heavy day and night of drinking, upon getting back to the hotel, they got to daring each other to jump into the pool from their second-floor balcony. The groom-to-be completely messed it up and hit the edge of the pool with his head, breaking his neck. It didn't kill him, but now he has no feeling below his upper shoulders. Nice start to married life, making yourself a paraplegic. The exotic dancer wanted to spank the groom. The groom said no. The best man said no. Other groomsmen said no. She then said, "All right, well, I'm not going to kiss another woman." We'd hired 2 of them. "Until I spank someone." Well, I'm not letting that go, so I drop my pants and she says, "Let's go." She beat the crap out of my butt. I stood up involuntarily once, she hit me so hard. I had to hide the black and blues from the wife for a week. Funnily enough, it was the second time I've had it done. The first time, the lady in question was hitting my friend with a belt and he said stop. She grabbed me and told me to be a real man, and hit me. I said, "That all you got, you C-word?" And she loved that. And then she hit me right in that spot above your butthole but below your tailbone. Oof, I didn't sit right for a week. During my brother's bachelor party, we just planned on getting drunk and playing Time Crisis 3, but we ended up getting so wasted that we spent most of our tokens on Marvel vs. Capcom and Sunset Rovers. Wild night. This is realistically about as crazy a bachelor party as most of us will ever have, I feel, and you know what? Nothing wrong with that. I would rather a cozy night in with my best pals than waking up in the buck on a building roof next to a donkey, despite how good of a story that latter one seems. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Okay, so this one is a bit complicated. I'll do my best to explain everything so everyone can keep up. In college, I dated this girl. We'll call her Trish to protect the innocent or whatever. We were together for a few years and were truly in love. She and I ended up breaking up because I was stupid and she went off and joined the military. We stayed in touch and stayed very good friends, even as she moved to Germany with the US Air Force. In Germany, she meets a guy, they fall in love and decide to get married. He is from California, so they're going to have their wedding there. Trish's dad is a giant, crystal-loving piece of crap straight out of the armpit of Alabama. So seeing as she doesn't really have any family she wants at the wedding, aside from her younger sister, Trish asks me to walk her down the aisle. Of course, I agree to do it. So, I fly to California, ready to party. I meet the groom, meet his family, and get reintroduced to Trish's sister and settle in at my hotel. The bachelor party is that night, and I really have no idea what to expect. Remember, I've never met any of these people before, and the only person I know at the entire gathering is Trish and kind of her sister. We start the night at one of those indoor, high-speed go-kart places, taking breaks in between sessions to drink tequila in the parking lot. It's dangerous and stupid, but everyone's having a blast, apart from the 18-year-old boyfriend of the groom's sister. He started the night convinced he could keep up, but the tequila got the chunks blowing out of every hole in his face by the third round of parking lot shots. He stayed with us the whole night despite getting ill though, so credit to him for that. Next we went to a bar. I should say at this point that I was never a big drinker before all this, so I'm just kind of along for the ride with some seriously seasoned alcoholics. We got pretty hammered there before moving on to the Exotic Dance Club. This is a seriously nice place north of San Francisco. I can't remember the name, it's been years. And it's announced that the groom is getting married tomorrow and it's his last night of freedom, blah blah blah. Instant attention for the entire group of us, about 5. The groom and the best man had set aside some serious cash for this, so there's lots of trips to the champagne room, including the one where we all get downstairs kisses from one of the nice paid ladies. There may be no full-body adult fun in the champagne room, but there is definitely mouth-to-eggplant action, Chris Rock. The night ends with us closing down the Exotic Dance Club, all of us hammered. The best man, who's a beefy military dude, sees the bouncer has a taser on his belt, and he wants to see if he can take a taser shot, but the bouncer refuses to do it. Instead, he volunteers that one of this guy's friends, us, can tase him, but the bouncer can't for liability reasons. I was hammered, and despite only knowing these guys for a few hours, I grab the taser and blast this guy in the ribs with it. Surprisingly, or maybe due to his drunkenness, he can take a taser shot. Cheers from all of us, all the tired dancers and bouncers and riffraff at the club at 4 in the morning. I was astonished and just happy I hadn't accidentally killed the person I'd just met. Everyone heads out and I ended up back at my hotel around 5 a.m. I needed to be at the wedding at 10 a.m. and I was jet-lagged from flying in from the East Coast anyway. I make it to the wedding just fine, not even hungover or anything. But wait, there's more. The wedding morning goes smoothly, aside from the best man looking rather worse for wear from his hangover and taser shot, the taser shot that he can't remember taking, but has a burn mark on his chest for some reason. As I was walking Trish down the aisle, she leans in and says, "If this doesn't work out, I can always call you, right?" I'm shocked, but I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. The rest of the wedding goes smoothly, it's really fun, and the newly married couple is really happy despite what Trish had to say to me during her last seconds of being single. I mentioned these people were seasoned drinkers, and the after-wedding party goes absolutely bonkers. Everyone is frickin' plastered again, and with the bride and her sister being the only people I really knew, I ended up hanging out with her sister for most of the night. Trish was more than a little busy, it being her wedding night and having the entire party centered around her after all. Well, Trish sees me and her sister getting along so well and asks me a favor. I have a hotel with 2 twin beds. Can I take the sister off her hands so her and her new husband can have their first night as a married couple without her around? Sure, absolutely. Well, long story short, it seems the sister had always had a crush on me and we end up doing the deed in my hotel that night. The next morning rolls around and Trish and her new husband come to the hotel to pick her up. I answer the door in a state of semi-undress and Trish knows immediately what went on. She flips right the F out. The rest of that weekend was awkward as all hell. The groom's family and friends all hate me, and now the sister is seriously pining after me like I should have expected. It's a disaster. But I fly home, a good time had, and I just chalk it up to another friendship ruined over something dumb I did. I end up staying in touch with Trish despite her wanting to murder me. A few years went by and things were back to normal, so when her husband has to visit my city on business, I invite the 2 of them to stay with me for the night. They come, meet my girlfriend, hang out, get drunk, and they generally have a nice time. They leave the next morning and all seems back to the way it was before the wedding. 6 months later, Trish wants to come visit me again, alone this time. Her husband is out on military business for an extended period and she doesn't want to sit around Germany by herself for a month. So she wants to come and visit me for a week or so. Great! She comes along and it's just like it was in college. Best friends hanging out, but with the boyfriend, girlfriend, and doing the deed part out of the question. The night before she was about to leave, we were just watching TV, and she starts sobbing. Her marriage is falling apart, her husband is a jerk, she hates her life, and she wants to stay with me. She flies back to Germany the next day. She waits for her husband to come back from his business trip and informs him that she's leaving permanently and going back to the States. I find out about all of this about a week before she's scheduled to fly into my city, with whatever belongings she has in tow. He was supposed to mail the rest of her stuff, but he never did in the end. Originally, she was going to stay with family while she figured things out, but I invite her to stay with me. We end up falling back into old habits the night she gets back, and having amazing bedroom fun times. It isn't long before we agree to give it another try and we end up back together, despite my reprehensible behavior at our wedding. Skip ahead 8 years to now. We've been married for almost 6 years, we're very happy and we have an adorable 4-year-old daughter. The night before Trish and I got married, instead of a huge bachelor blowout like her first wedding, she stayed with a friend and I spent the evening alone in my apartment playing my 2 favorite video games, Resident Evil 4 and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, before going to bed at a reasonable hour. And yes, before you ask, her sister was her maid of honor at our wedding. It should have been awkward, but everyone had a great time. In short, dated girl, broke up, agreed to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, got drunk, did the deed with a working girl's mouth, tasered a guy, did the deed with her sister, but there was a very happy, if bizarre, ending to the whole saga, and that's where my life is now. Whoa, what an epic saga! Sounds like you guys both ended up with who you were meant to be with regardless of the rocks that you hit getting there. Speaks volumes of how comfortable and accepting of each other you are that these other factors weren't lasting problems going forward, and that you had a long, happy marriage and a kid. And now, our final mega story for the night. Well, I have one, and boy is it a doozy. My friends kidnapped me for my bachelor party. We got in a car and drove down the coast to San Diego. Stopped along the way for seafood, listened to Bon Jovi and Scorpions all the way down, and had a frickin' blast. We got to the Hard Rock, of course, and immediately started drinking. I probably had half a bottle of rum before we even left the room. We went down to the pool, and my buddy yelled out, "Here's the Bachelor!" And that was it. Everyone was buying me shots. Literally, they had Jell-O shots in syringes that they plunged right into your mouth. I remember doing about 6 shots, in addition to the margarita in my hand, because mixing booze is totally a good idea, right? And then I got in the hot tub. Then I remember I couldn't find my friends. And a girl was taking me back to the elevators. And then my friends were in the room too, and I was completely undressed. Frick. The realization of what had just happened sobered me right the frick up, and I completely freaked out. I was jumping up and down in the room, completely undressed, limp manhood flopping around like a dying fish, screaming at my friends that they just let me cheat on my fiancé, and this was all their fault. They would not stop laughing. Apparently, what actually happened is that I got really drunk and started to pass out in the hot tub, so my friends escorted me back to the room to sleep it off. The girl I remember was one of my buddies who'd secured a wig during his partying and thought it was hilarious. They then showed me the wig. It was totally one of those blue and yellow Chargers wigs they wear at the football games. And the more I thought about it, it was absolutely the hair of the girl that I'd followed back to the room. Thank God. After leaving me in the room, they'd all gone back to the party to let me sleep it off, and I'd been in the room for about 3 hours sound asleep. Somewhere after they left the room, I decided to take off all of my clothes, which is why I was completely undressed. They also showed me the several photos they took of them standing behind my exposed butt, giving thumbs up and making other obscene gestures. I'm going to be completely honest here. These are a good bunch of guys who are also jerks of the finest caliber. Much relieved, we decided it was best if we all just got dressed for dinner. It's important to note that, at this particular instant, everyone in the room, myself included, believed that I'd merely slept during the 3-hour interlude whilst I was in the room, and my friends were at the pool party. This, as we soon learned, was not the case. In preparation for the pool party earlier that day, we'd all changed out of our normal street clothes and into pool attire in the room. Among the many items left in the room as a result of the changing process were my friend's $400 pair of fine leather boots. Boots which, at that precise moment that we all decided to get dressed, were on the floor next to my bed. I put on my pants, my best man put on his shirt, another groomsman put on his suit, and our last friend stuck his foot into the first boot and discovered that it was full of the contents of someone's stomach, presumably chucked into there at great velocity as a result of too much alcohol. I believe he screamed, "What the ever-loving F," as he kicked the boot off his foot as hard as he could. Please, dear listener, take a moment to imagine how one physically kicks a boot off of one's foot. Does it shoot straight off in a lovely arc whereby any liquid, however unlikely, that might be inside of it would remain in the boot? Or does it in fact spin like a helicopter's stabilizing rotor, end over end, spraying vomitous goo upon the floor, beds, ceiling, and of course the person who kicked off said boot? Spoiler alert, it's the latter. The rest of this story is all downhill. I was spared purchasing a new pair of boots for my friend, the other boot was also full, but I did have to clean the entire room. A task for which I somehow felt that a pile of bar coasters was an adequate tool. My friend changed out of his chuck-covered pants, showered again, and put on his jeans with his shirt and sports coat, which were miraculously unfouled. We all went out for dinner, which I was not okay to eat given the state of my stomach, and I went back to the room and slept until morning, at which point much ceremony was made of everyone checking their shoes to see if I'd chucked up again. I had not. I do regret that I missed what was, by all accounts, a great party, but I'm glad that I had what I consider to be a true bachelor party experience. Namely, I had a party so absurd that it removed from me, for quite some time, the urge to party, or even the smell of alcohol again, thereby keeping me at home with my wife and happily within the confines of my marriage bed, a sanctity which I have never, to this day, violated. I really wish I'd been awake enough to go to that exotic dance club, though. People who work at remote places, like forest officers, oil rig workers, what creepy things have you noticed while at work? I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my coworker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered the "oh god" from us, but it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, which was kinda sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotty shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposefully placed in a chair in the middle of the wood, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, which was a hellhole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter, staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I worked at a public forest. One day we had someone report a dead animal on the side of one of our trails. A few of us from the front desk hiked out to see what it was. It looked like a giant piece of liver, maybe? Just a pile of smooth red meat. No blood around. And it was wrapped up in a t-shirt with some coins scattered around it. We called our rangers to go check it out, and one of them was pretty sure it was placenta. The weird part is, you have to check in through a front desk, so someone either snuck a placenta or liver in, or gave live birth or removed an organ on our trails. We never got an answer on what that pile of meat was, how it got there, or why. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis off the coast of Scotland. I wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormally creepy, but it can be a very unsettling and weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkways 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over the grating, you can't see the sea below your feet. It's only about 60 meters down from deck to sea, but you can hear it, all of it muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving and swaying on the high winds and rough seas, even though it's a fixed-leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift, and I found it particularly unsettling, as you got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there's about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller headcounts. Usually, once a trip, I'm hit by this awareness that you're just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land, so if things go wrong, it can escalate very quickly. Yeah, I've thought about a lot of these sorts of jobs where you get paid a lot more because of the remoteness, loneliness, and the fact that in the very unlikely event of an emergency, you're probably screwed. Still, I have the first two already, so maybe a little danger would spice up my life. My college was located away from major cities, and the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he'd never been on an extended backpacking trip, a more than 50-mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I'm an Eagle Scout who spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before, you get used to the minor, spooky things happening – coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being in Pennsylvania, where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people or people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off the trail, where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out at about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It's the fall semester, so the leaves are on the ground, and the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time where I'd hear my friend turn over in his sleep. And then I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100 meters away. I checked my watch. It was 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We were 20 miles in. I slowly got out of my sleeping bag, unzipped my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, and then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path. They're walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike they're a third of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring woodcutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it's my only way of defending myself, I'm more disheveled than I've ever been, especially knowing that a knife is barely a defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what feels like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they're doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only then a few extra Mountain House MRE-style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following: "We don't use lights, we know where the trail is, and it's better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we don't. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got some real shut-eye. By the afternoon when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I've never had something as weird or spooky as that happen in the woods, and I hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to the Loyal Sock Trail. I have a bunch of friends that love to do mushrooms. This definitely sounds like something they'd do. I used to be a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple of times a week I had to go to a middle school and clean their hallway floors and gymnasium with a Zamboni-type vehicle that mopped and scrubbed the floor. When I was there, I had the whole school to myself. I used to get finished quickly and go to the library and read while eating my dinner. Well, one morning after being there, I got a call from school security and they wanted me to come in. When I got there, I saw a police car too. Uh-oh, I think. They asked me a few questions like, "Did you notice anything out of the ordinary or strange while you were here last night?" No, I hadn't. I usually have my headphones in. Security then shows me camera footage of someone breaking into one of the classrooms while I was riding the Zamboni not far away. I was there for another 2 hours. Nothing was stolen, but the worst part was they didn't have footage of the person leaving. They didn't go out the way they came in, and police had to sweep the entire school. Never did find out what happened with that one. I think someone needs to go check up on the person who wrote this comment because as far as I'm concerned, there's a non-zero chance he's being haunted by a phantom and may have been cursed or something in his subsequent shifts at the school. I used to work on a ship and we usually go on 3 to 10 months at a time. I work night shifts, so this meant I could sleep in the sleeping quarters during daytime with either just me or a handful of other crew members, where usually there'd be 20 to 30 of us in there. It wasn't so bad. Actually, I really liked it because it's a lot more peaceful sleeping during the day. You don't hear anyone else snoring or someone's footsteps because they get up in the night to pee or anything like that. All you can hear is the light creak of the walls and the floors of the ship, and all you can feel is the sway of it on the ocean. A bit haunting and creepy if you really think about it, but I like it. All of that ended when there was a short period of time where there were only 2 of us sleeping in the room. At least that's what I thought. I started hearing light taps across the room. At first they were light taps, then it would get a bit faster, and sometimes a bit louder. I'd ignore it if it wasn't so utterly annoying. I looked at where the other guy was sleeping and he seems to be fast asleep, accompanied by his light snoring. Second day, there it goes again. I tried to follow the sound, but for some reason it bounced around the room like an echo. Eventually, it comes to an abrupt halt, so I tried to sleep it off. During the night shift, I tried to ask the other guy if he had heard it, but he said he was too tired to even notice. I guess I'm alone in this pursuit. On the 3rd day, I take my pursuit one step further by not sleeping right away. I'd be fully awake when it started, so I'll have a better chance of discovering the source. And there it goes again. This time I go from one empty rack to the next, until finally it was loud as heck, tapping in progress. My heart was thumping like a jackhammer. I pulled the curtain to one side. There lay the biggest dude I've seen on the ship, holding his manhood mid-stroke. You have no idea the speech I'd prepared for this guy in my head for keeping me up for several days, but at that exact moment I had no idea what to say. Of course, I gave out a small yelp, which didn't help the situation. I never thought I'd be locking eyes with another guy while he's gripping his eggplant while I begin this honorable pursuit. With the current situation, I mustered my best attempt at displaying my irritation. It somehow came out as an apology, followed by, "I keep hearing tapping noises." He hadn't said anything yet, but at that exact moment I realized his elbow, which belonged to the working arm, was resting right on the wall, probably banging on it over and over and over. I didn't wait for a reply. I nodded my head, kind of rolled my eyes, and walked away. It will never be easy trying to avoid a big guy like him every day in the same sleeping quarters. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the blueprints that there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious that there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where 2 things are known to happen. Stowaways, although I doubt that was the case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time just following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There's only one way this could have happened, and I'm sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases hadn't killed them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I definitely have. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion, and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. So that's where the monster that will eventually break out and lead to a really great horror event aboard the ship is being kept. I can't wait to find out what it is, although I do hope that the Netflix movie holds up to the real events. When I was 15 years old, I was doing my 4 a.m. newspaper delivery round on my bicycle. I was driving into the garden of this one subscriber where I saw two guys with flashlights looking through the windows of the house. I was kind of in shock and just said, "Good morning, guys." They were just as much in shock, and an awkward silence followed. I tried to break the silence by asking if I could pass them to deliver the newspaper through the door, and one of the guys said the person living in that house did something to his family, and they took it as an opportunity to get away in their car that was still running. When they were gone, I rang the doorbell at the house to tell them what had happened, and they should keep an eye out. This is kind of how you end up like that kid in Breaking Bad. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I was fueling up the side boom. I was all by myself at this point because I was tired of listening to the laborers whine about the cold, so I told them I'd take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade, but a giant metal boom on the side that we used to raise and lower the pipe. It was February, so pitch black. I keep hearing some weird sound. I can't quite hear it because the pump is too loud. I search around a couple of times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off and drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a pile of dirt 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there and probably could have ended me without even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before, and it's hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful until you get up close to one. That thing leapt off the 6-foot pile and probably didn't touch the ground for 15 to 20 feet. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there, deciding if they want to make you dinner. I'm not sure if this counts, but I'm a teacher at an urban public school and was at work late grading and packing for the next day. Time had kind of flown by, and before I knew it, it was 7 p.m. I started packing up to leave in a building that is, in theory, locked and empty besides me, when our Alice alarm goes off, indicating an armed intruder in the building. I am 1. Alone, 2. Young, and 3. Freaked as hell because I am absolutely not ready to fight a weapon-toting madman over my lesson plans. I book it out of the school and dive into my car, hearing the alarm blaring the entire time. I peel out of the parking lot and can see in my rear view the alarm lights still flashing and debate never going back, because screw that. Turns out they were doing routine maintenance and didn't send out an email to the teachers. My mum used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains and worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that happened was when the oldest male ranger kept hitting on her and trying to get her to come home with him. Not very out of the ordinary, but many years later, after she'd left the town, she found out he'd been convicted of manslaughter and had killed a young female ranger right before she got hired. She probably would have been his next target. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810s, and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, so to deter trespassing and vandalism, the county had built an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention all of this just to show it was basically impossible for anyone or anything to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me, and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair. Almost like a taller maned wolf, if you've ever seen pictures of one of those. That alone shook me, as there's no way something of that size should have been able to get through or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the heck that thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away. Not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs, and sprint away. I absolutely freaked out at that point. I grabbed my mag light and my shotty from inside and tried to find the thing again. There was no trace, no tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of my property. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on my couch with my shotty, watching the front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I can't explain what the heck I saw that night, but it still raises hair on my neck every time I think about it. And that would be the story of how I quit that job. Because I think if you stick around, your only career advancement is going to be mauled corpse found by the protagonist later with the exposition diary warning them to run. I think I'll wait for a better part, thank you. My oldest brother used to work the overnight sprinklers on a golf course. He took me out one time just for fun, and as we were driving uphill on a fairway, a figure of a lady appeared in the headlights at the top of the hill. My brother steered a little to the left of her and kept driving right on by. I stared right into her eyes as we drove past, and she stared back. Her eyes glowed like a cat in the night. As soon as we were out of voice range, I asked my brother, "Who the hell was that?" He calmly responded, "Oh yeah, she lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week." Alright, cool. When I was a kid living in Queensland, Australia, I used to bush bash, meaning walk off the beaten track through thick scrub. I knew the national park my house backed onto like the back of my hand. I knew from the topography where I was at all times. Both of my parents were ex-military and had a sort of hands-off approach, trusting me even as young as 12 to venture off on my own into the wilderness. So I could just pack a lunch and my sister and neighborhood friend would come with. We'd head off early in the morning, returning just before sunset, usually. Once, when I, the eldest, was about 14, we had been following creek beds and bashing over heavily forested hills towards an area I'd never been. We came down a hill, through a gully full of ferns, and followed a dry creek bed for another hour. The sides of the creek became steep and rocky. Before long, we were passing through a gorge. As we emerged from the gorge, we noticed what looked like a dwelling. Being idiot kids, we wanted to see what was up. It looked abandoned at first, but as we got closer, we saw that tarps had been affixed to a ramshackle structure. Chicken wire surrounded what looked like a pen just outside. As my eyes traveled across it, I suddenly caught another pair of eyes looking directly back at me. A Rottweiler. We started slowly edging back away from the property, but it was too late. The dog started going nuts, and worried that it was coming after us, or at least alerting the person living in the hut, we bolted. I went back to the area a few times, but not too close to the abode itself, and found discarded bones from small game and other bits and pieces, spent .22 casings and a few other things. As an adult and knowing the area, it's very likely we stumbled across a homeless person camping out or a crystal lab, as the area, as I'd find out as an adult, was absolutely riddled with crystal labs. Some friends and I were fishing a small pond just after dark for catfish. We started to hear sounds coming off the water like someone was throwing softball-sized rocks, but they were coming from all over the pond. We thought someone was messing with us and we called out a few times for them to stop, but we eventually got freaked out and left. Cut to a few years later, I'm fishing a different pond and hear the same sound. Turns out it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water to drive me from its territory. When beavers become problems in rivers, they relocate them to ponds in town. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we'd get pretty close to it to fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some crap, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us the F out. I work as a polar bear guard, as in I escort people across tundra and mountains and protect them from polar bears. I once saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes, and rather creepy. I spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and lots of other remote locations, collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, and what sounded like owls fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job, until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going overland on no road and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at 100 yards away, got back in the truck, and turned around. This was after dark, and the shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush, and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a weapon when we went back out. I didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. What's the wildest, so where are they now, revelation about someone from your past? I googled my first grade crush and discovered a long list of arrests and his untimely death a few months ago. This was written in 2012. The first girl I ever had a big crush on in 6th or 7th grade believes that December 21st really is the end of the world. Last I checked, she had moved to Brazil, bought a house, a used Porsche, and racked up 30 to 40 grand in credit card debt. She hasn't worked a day in just over a year. December 22nd is going to be a rough day for a lot of people. Went to middle school with this really cute girl, but she had some emotional problems. She'd cry a lot and always get into trouble. 20 years later, I get a hold of her after my divorce because I don't know why. She's beaten cancer and is very well adjusted. We're dating now. Couldn't be happier. My dad looked up someone he used to be good friends with when he was younger. Turns out he's the creator of a game called Club Penguin, and he sold that game to Disney and got around $100 million. My dad's neighbor and childhood friend went ape on his entire family with a hatchet. A friend who everyone thought was an idiot is now a millionaire. I'm really happy for him. I never thought he was an idiot. You can still be an idiot and be a millionaire, by the way. Some guy I went to school with did a surfing trip around the world, sold his stuff and settled down on some island halfway around the world, I can't remember the name of where. He became intimate with one of the natives, lived on a beach, and sold dream catchers to tourists. Go figure. A year or two back, I googled my best friend from 2nd and 3rd grade, someone I hadn't seen in about 30 years, and my last memory of whom was us playing with our Han Solo and Boba Fett action figures. He's an executive at Pixar. It was about then that my midlife crisis went into full swing. And you know what? Fair enough. When you have that to compare yourself to, a little bit of ruminating and future panicking is fair enough. Luckily for me, my friends are all just as big a group of losers as I am. There was a guy that I wrestled in high school when he was a freshman who ended up being the 3-time state champion. Everyone said he could wrestle at any college in the nation. I googled his name a couple of years ago and found out he was in prison for committing the unspeakable act against his best friend's mother while he was intoxicated. I bumped into someone that I knew from high school who had always been a bit of an aloof jerk, but I didn't have much contact with him. I didn't recognize him initially because he acted very spaced out and had some serious facial scarring going on. I found out from another friend that since I'd last seen him, he had dropped out of university, moved to Paris, where he had taken quite a heroic amount of substances and taken over someone else's religion/cult. He tried to convince his parishioners that they could all fly and demonstrated this from a window on the 2nd floor. Hence the facial scarring. Whenever I feel like an underachiever compared to other schoolmates, I think of this guy. But to be fair, he was the leader of a cult. High school friend who graduated in 2010 with a 1-year-old child, waiting for her boyfriend to be released from prison so they could get married. He was convicted for doing the unspeakable act on another girl. One of my best friends in high school is now in the biggest rock band in my country. Every time I see him on TV in his slick rock outfits, I see the 16-year-old him. Ponytail in his neck, old woolen sweater to his knees, and army boots. I texted him yesterday when he played a live show on TV. I got a text back about 1 minute after they'd finished. It's very surreal. This one kid I knew in high school always seemed like he was a few cans shy of a six-pack. Sweet guy, but he always acted like he had been hitting the wacky tobacco a bit hard, and in general he seemed a bit inane. Fast forward to now, I friended him on Facebook and it turns out he's a local newscaster with a journalism degree and competes in professional ballroom dancing. He constantly posts really smart, witty things, and in general has his life together, way more than I would have expected. Chatting with him, I learned that he never really felt like he had any need to be himself in high school because people were so shallow anyway. So he played a monkey-like character, and at home practiced his ballroom dancing, wrote articles for online publications under a pseudonym, and, I can only assume, sat around listening to classical music, wearing a top hat and monocle, and sipping scotch like a sir. You just never really know people. Oh god, I have a list. 2 of my high school classmates became Olympic gymnasts. 1 high school crush had a nervous breakdown and brandished a knife at a police officer, who shot her. She survived and eventually opened a massage parlor in Vegas. A high school classmate, who I always thought was a bit of a jerk, became a police officer. He's currently in prison for participating in a drive-by shooting. And a childhood friend moved away and we lost touch. He became an actor playing Bulk on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I found out a few months ago my brother's friend in middle school I used to play GoldenEye with in my basement founded this little website called Reddit, Alexis Ohanian. I went to check up on my ex. We weren't very serious and it ended amicably, but didn't keep in touch, partly due to me moving across the ocean. I went to look her up earlier this year and found out she died in a car crash because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Weird feeling, but I feel worse for her daughter who now has to grow up without a mother. I recently found my best friend from 2nd grade on Facebook and discovered she's now a very proud exotic dancer. This is fine and all, but what was shocking is that when we were kids, I was the overtly weird and flirty one. She was so innocent that this discovery was kind of jarring. I've been debating whether or not to just show up at the club, buy a lap dance, and make it awkward. A very nice kid I went to middle school with took a bunch of substances and then beat 2 homeless people to death with his bare hands. He did this when he was 16. Oof. I used to know this girl growing up. Her parents knew my parents, so even though she was a few years younger, we spent a lot of time together. She was tall and lanky, super awkward and shy. 15 years later, my parents tell me she won some kind of modeling competition, married an older guy in the industry that she met on the show, which was Vegas Wedding with Elvis, and moved to California. Apparently, he's got serious money, so she doesn't work, but he flies her friends over from Sweden regularly so she doesn't get bored or lonely. There's this 30-year age gap, but apparently it's true love and they're both very happy. Not as crazy as some stories here, but I had a friend during my teenage years that I nearly hung out with on the daily. We always hung around in skate parks and did a lot of green herb together and had a good time. She was a good friend, but moved away at 17. I lost contact with her, which is partially my fault, but that's another story. Contacted her about 2 years ago, asking if she wanted to hang out and smoke a bit, like in the old days. I got a response and we met and started smoking some green herb. She looked me in the eyes and told me, "I should tell you, I am a cop nowadays." It was kind of strange to see my old friend that was into the punk scene and generally didn't like cops too much, being a cop. My secret crush from middle school grew up and became Pink. Dear Pink, well done, Alicia. This is why I kept it secret. I totally knew you outclassed me. Yeah, I reckon you should have shot your shot back then. What's the worst that could happen? They write a song about what a lame, limp, poorly endowed boyfriend you were, and just have your name be the title of the song. Oh, actually, maybe you did the best thing. I'm a bit late to the game, but this girl I went to school with ended up in LA making adult movies. The twist is that she's using my real name as her adult film star name. My name is really not that common, and while we were friends in school, she'd told me a few times that she really liked my name. It's very strange to Google her and see her mid-deed amidst a gaggle of strangers with my name. She and I went out a few times in high school, but nothing came of it. I ran into her years later and talked briefly, exchanged contact info, and parted. I asked her out, but she kept putting it off, and eventually I stopped asking. Maybe I was never the kind of guy she was interested in and didn't know how to properly say no, so maybe she gave excuses, hoping that I'd get the hint. I looked her up sometime later and found out she'd changed her last name. Not terribly uncommon when someone gets married. Oh, so she's got married. Well, good for her, I guess, I think. I'll just go out to check out her Facebook profile and yep, there's an album of honeymoon pictures. And oh, there's her wife. So that explains a lot. I found out my 1st grade guy crush is currently a woman. I've tried to look up my first love a number of times over the last few years, but for a long time she did a good job of keeping her info off the internet. Last year, however, I found some information I'd rather not have found. She went on an alcoholic bender, got kicked out of the Navy, I think, had a kid, and had been arrested at least twice for multiple counts of theft and being a working girl. I always wonder how things might have been different if I'd moved across country with her when she wanted me to 10 years ago. Sadly, she put me in a position where I just couldn't do that. 2 weeks' notice to leave my hometown without a plan or money just wasn't something I could do at that age. Wherever you are now, I hope your life is better than it seems from the outside looking in. One of my good friends in grade school was raised by extremely religious and uptight parents. We're talking the kind of parents who wouldn't let us play Final Fantasy because it had magic in it, and that was the work of the devil. He moved away in like 6th grade. I found him on MySpace back when that was the main social media thing. The guy is now about as flamboyantly gay as can possibly be. I'm sure his parents are thrilled. My best friend from 5th grade is in the new 90210 series and also voiced Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars cartoon. I grew up with a girl from elementary school to grade 11. We were never close, but we had a bunch of classes together. Decently connected with my family. Smart, beautiful, popular. Her mum was great too, used to clean our elementary school in the mornings. I haven't seen her in a few years, but I found out her mum had been going crazy, till the point where she walked up behind the girl and slit her throat. Nicked her carotid artery, but thankfully she made it. Caught her mum and she's being charged. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I visited New Zealand a while back, I stopped by a bookstore and picked up an old hardback copy of Lord Jim by Joseph E. Conrad, dated 1928, with a "To Lennox Douglas from J.E.C." on the first page. If you're not familiar with Lord Jim, the gist of the plot is as follows. A young man is crewing a ratty old transport ship when it has an accident and is expected to sink. The crew, including Jim, pile into the only lifeboat and escape. However, the boat doesn't sink and they're all put on trial and labeled cowards for life. Jim spends his years trying to be a good and brave man in the far corners of the world to atone. And he dies young in a blaze of glory, so to speak. Anyway, I googled Lennox Douglas. 13 to 14 years after receiving this book as a gift, he found himself serving as a crew member on a transport ship in a convoy trying to evacuate Allied troops from Greece. The Luftwaffe sank his ship. 2 destroyers stayed behind to help survivors of the wreck, and both of them were also sunk within hours. There were virtually no survivors. The lifeboats were all strafed and sunk as well. So I guess I honestly don't know how to feel. I haven't figured out the moral yet. It's not just coincidence. It's not appropriate, it's just bizarre and unsettling and sad. Maybe a little toast for bravery. A friend of mine who got me started on my wild, substance-fueled, debaucherous life in my late teens, no regrets, I had a great time, one day decided he'd go to LA and become a rich and famous rock star. No internet back then, so we didn't stay in touch. I was fully expecting to see him on TV one day. He was that kind of guy. Hot, persistent, and ruthless. In the nicest way possible. But it never happened. When I went to visit my hometown last year, I met his sister. She told me he'd been gone for about 5 years without ever contacting his family. Then he came back, nice and smiling but not answering any questions. Instead, he made a big fire in the garden, burned all of his belongings, and went on to become a monk in a monastery. I still wonder what happened there. I googled my Chinese ex-girlfriend and came up with hundreds of people who were not her. A couple of weeks ago, I got a spam text for e-cigs. It showed up like a real number, had my first name in the message, and was signed with Johnny, which caught me off guard. That was the name of one of my dealers and good friends from college that I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years. So I went to check his Facebook page, thinking maybe one of our mutual friends gave him my number and he was messing with me. Turns out he passed away in June. No idea what happened, but his page was flooded with condolences and memories and such. I cried when I saw a post from his dad about the funeral. We didn't exactly end on great terms, but he was a nice guy and was always there to cheer people up. Rest in peace, Johnny. My aunt gave up a child for adoption because of how young she was when he was born. 20 years later, we found out he became an NFL player for the Chargers. Well, I can't say I condemn anyone in this. It seems like he did well enough with the upbringing he got, even if he definitely doesn't have to thank her for dumping him. And if she was too young to raise a kid and had a good adoption system set up, great, as long as she doesn't go trying to grub any favors off him. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and I had the same best friends since 6th grade. One went MIA when we went to college. I still remember the last time I saw him. We were at my grandparents' cottage in Indiana. It was me, Mike, my freshman year roommate, my 2 other buddies, and my girlfriend. It was the day before we were all leaving, so we were going to take the pontoon out to the sandbar for a few hours. I asked Mike if he wanted to go, but he was sleeping, so he said no. The rest of us went out and were there for a few hours when here comes Mike heading for us on the Wave Runner. He pulls up to us and says, "Hey guys, I'm leaving," and turned around and headed up into the sunset on the Wave Runner. I tried calling or texting or going by his house, and he was just never there or never answered. It's been 2.5 years since I've seen him. We're all seniors now. I found out this past summer he's studying nuclear engineering in Louisiana and working part-time on an oil rig. Kid I went to high school with, unspeakable act registry, there for the worst sort of that particular crime too. I can't say the word on YouTube. I have a better one, but it's more of a where were they then? My biological father pieced out when I was in maybe 6th grade. When I was about 24, I hadn't seen him since. I lived on the other side of the country from my hometown. I was in a band with some friends and we called ourselves Delta 9, short for Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Anyways, I decided to Google a name to see if any other bands were using that name. Being on the green herb at the time, I soon lost myself in the Google results and was just reading interesting stuff about green herb. I happened across an Amazon link. It turned out to be my father's dissertation on the effects of THC on mice. I had no idea. Pregnant, married, pregnant, dead, graduated college and doing quite well for himself, dropped out of high school, semi-successful DJ, pregnant. There was this one kid I was an absolute jerk to back in primary school. That's elementary school for you Americans. Not just me, but the entire class just picked on this one guy for some god-unknown reason. I can't remember it, but it was bad. So bad it got to the point where I threw a stick at him and split his mouth open. I felt absolutely terrible the moment I threw the stick, but everyone laughed at him whilst he screamed on the floor, blood pouring out of his mouth. So I dragged him off to the nurse, told her what I'd done and got detention for a week. Well deserved to me, I think. Now this kid wasn't exactly the best looking kid around, but who was at 9 years old? Lots of puppy fat, smelled a bit funny and was just a bit awkward. After the incident, I talked to him a bit more and he turned out to be really nice. I lost contact with him when I moved school 2 weeks later. 10 years pass and I accidentally bump into him at the shops. I didn't even recognize the guy. He knew me though, and he got handsome as F. No homo, but the guy was good looking. Well-dressed, lean, and just incredibly happy. All I could say was how sorry I was about throwing that stick a decade ago, but he brushed it off and laughed like it never happened. He was going great in life and actually thanked me for being a jerk to him. Apparently, if myself and the other guys hadn't bullied him, he probably would have stayed the same person as he was before. Now, I definitely don't condone any form of bullying, as I've been on both ends of the shtick, no pun intended, but I was glad he'd risen so far above me and become this fantastic guy. I really hope he succeeds in life, he genuinely deserves it. As for me, I can only hope I'll end up as good a person as him. When I was 16 or 17, I was hanging out with this really strange kid every now and then. He was a racist, fascist, Third Reich enthusiast with a huge interest and great taste in everything 60s, 70s, and 80s music, and an awesome collection of music original reel-to-reel audio tapes with an accompanying awe-inspiring collection of old recorders. He used to go on and on about the N-words and then went on in starry-eyed admiration of Jimi Hendrix and managed to make a seamless transition to how great the leader of the Third Reich was, all while trying to keep toning down his sentiments to appease my really liberal left-wing views. One of the most messed up and twisted people I've ever known. And of course, he did substances. Lots and lots of substances. Alcohol, speed, white snow, molly, just about everything else you can think of in quantities I've never seen in my entire life. And he went through tons of the stuff in every evening, popping pills like Smarties. He constantly got in trouble with his parents, brother, the cops, a lot of shady characters. Never finished anything, school or several apprenticeships, failed all of them. He sometimes moved in with his grandma, sometimes his parents, always until someone kicked in the door and raided the place. Sometimes the cops, sometimes someone he had beef with, or occasionally even himself when he forgot where he had his keys. One of the most effed up people you can imagine, but he was fun to hang out with, every 2 months or so, as he was kind of exhausting as well. I occasionally met him on my way to or from work when I was older, always when he was drunk or on something else, while he himself was on his way to or from work as well. And then I lost contact and no one else heard from him, so I figured he had to be in prison, rehab, or dead. Either was imaginable or preferable to his regular lifestyle. A couple of weeks ago, I learned he's married and building a house. Boom, went my mind. I think I actually have a really interesting one. I was friends with this guy named Willie in junior high. He was my only friend there. We were close but lost contact after I moved a couple of cities over. Flash forward 5 years and my sister starts dating this guy who's my age. I meet him and lo and behold, it's my old friend from junior high. Except he's changed. He's obviously on something. I spotted it almost immediately as I walked in. I noticed the pockmarks from injections. Turns out my friend from junior high was now dating my sister and is addicted to smack. Fast forward 18 months and now he's wanted for grand larceny. So this isn't someone I actually looked up, I just heard it on the grapevine, but it's a pretty weird story. A guy from my secondary school class had moved to Australia, presumably for work, and while he was there, he evidently got a bit lonely. He hired a working girl, but got a bit of a shock when he discovered that she was in fact a pre-op transsexual. Somehow he didn't discover this until after they had done the deed. In a poorly thought out act of revenge, he stole her handbag which contained her passport. She was Indonesian, and he sent her a text demanding $100,000 for the handbag and passport back. So, what was her response to this? She called the frickin' cops. He was arrested and charged with theft and extortion. Moral of the story, don't try to extort people who haven't done anything illegal because they'll just call the cops, you jerk. In short, a guy moved to Australia and slept with a working girl, got freaked out when he discovered she was transsexual and stole her passport and demanded $100,000 for it back. She called the cops and had him arrested. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.